Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here with our final installment of the Big Ten previews, our beloved Spartans of Michigan State. Before we get into it, a brief word of thanks to Michael Yoakum for his one-time gift via PayPal, and all the supporters of the show. Patreon supporters of the Teen Cleaves level: Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, Mike Huntoon, and Scott Driscoll. Draymond Green supporters: Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, and Greg Bamer, as well as all the Scott Scout supporters of Patreon, and those on Substack: Rich Wagenheim, Kenneth Kremet, Roger Bronsink, Al, Michael Emmerich, Joe and BT, and Jim Rainey on Substack. If you want to support the show and get an ad-free version of the show, please head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support to get the necessary links. And a couple more quick announcements. We will be offering some new content this season, which you'll see in your feed. We're partnering with Dom Leese, which you may recall if you've listened to the show for a while. He's America's #1 bracketologist, as ranked by the Bracket Matrix. He and I plan to do one show a week covering seeding. Please follow Dom on X at BracketDom. So it's BracketDom. I think he will also start TikTok. We have not yet done that. So and it'll also appear on our YouTube channel, which does remind me, if you have not already, check out our YouTube channel, which you can find at TFFINOTS. Subscribe, click on the notification bell so that you can catch us when we go live after every MSU game. Of course, we love to have you join us on audio, version 2, but for those who want to get a little bit more interactive, at least join us after games and you can get involved in the discussion maybe as we get a little bit further along. All right, Rod, let's talk about the Spartans. And last year, I think there's unquestionably Michigan State had a very satisfying season, a lot of fun. It felt like the old Spartans. We hadn't seen that for some time, in the sense that we had a team that was rebounding really well, which they had done for a number of years. They were running really well, and they were defending like crazy. And it was a collective effort. It was not dominated by one or two players. I mean, although we had some very good players in the team, it was definitely a group effort to be as successful as it was. Elite Eight finish. I think you had them projected as number 5, and they ended up winning the league, and not only winning it, but winning by 3 games. So kind of lapping the field pretty easily. And so, that's the foundation, I guess, we got coming into this year. But I think, and of course, then we could mention Jase Richardson, which we'll talk about too, the individual players. But in so many ways, it was a really great season, and it was a lot of fun watching team. Because again, for me, it just felt like it was a return to sort of how they used to be, and they just hadn't been that way for probably since Winston, when he was point guard.
Yeah, it had been about 3-4 years. I agree. I think it was one of the more satisfying seasons, not just recently, but I would say when you factor in what the expectations were coming in. And, you mentioned where I had picked them, and I tend to be glass half full about the program, but I will admit to being surprised by how dominant they were in the league. So I would say it wasn't just one of the most satisfying seasons recently. I'd say it was one of the most satisfying seasons of Tom Izzo's entire tenure, because there wasn't as much expected. And as you say, not just the results are great, and that's always the bottom line, but you'd be incorrect to state that the way that you go about getting those results doesn't matter too.
Right.
To fans, for sure. I think to Tom Izzo, sometimes if you have a great individual player in basketball, one guy can be that much of a difference maker. It's a different sport than football, let's say. One guy can make that kind of difference. And if you have that kind of guy, that could sometimes cover up some warts, so to speak, right? Michigan
Yeah.
State didn't have that. For as great as Jase Richardson was, his role on this team was he wasn't scoring 25 points a night. Occasionally he'd do that, but not consistently. And so it took a collective effort. And I think that was really inspiring to a lot of Michigan State fans. It felt like, and Izzo has said it was one of the best locker rooms he's ever had in that respect, in that people really did not care about individual accolades. They didn't care about who was getting shots, who wasn't. They're trying to win games collectively, and they won a lot of games. I would say that when you factor all that together, really the only thing missing was a Final Four appearance and national title. They did everything else.
Right. Yeah.
That's going to leave you with having had a pretty good season on balance, no matter what. But I wanted to put some numbers to this. So you mentioned rebounding, and it was a return to form. They finished top 30 in both offensive and defensive rebounding rate. Michigan State has not had a team that did that since Denzel Valentine's senior year, 2015, 2016. That's a long time, almost a decade.
Yeah.
Did it by playing stifling defense. They finished with the number 4 overall defensive efficiency rating in the nation. They haven't been that good since Draymond Green was a senior, 2011, 2012. That team finished number 2 defensively. So we haven't had a top 5 defense in that long. So more like closer to 15 years, right? They did it by running. They finished with the 4th highest amount of fast break points per game in the country, and were number 1 among high major teams. And I point that out because the fact of the matter is, in any high major conference, it is more difficult to finish high in that category because the caliber of athletes and the caliber of coaching and scouting, quite frankly, tends to be higher, and teams' opponents are more easily able, in general, I'm generalizing, but I think it's true as a general statement, they're more easily able to take away a running game, for example. Because you could do that. If you really want to sell out to stop a running game, there are things that you can do. We've seen Wisconsin do it for 25 years, right? So my point is, it's hard. It's hard to finish with a number like that. We know Michigan State always wants to run, but being able to do it to that level, we haven't seen that in a long time. I didn't look up how long it's been, but I'm going to venture a guess it's been a while since they finished top 5 in that category as well. So you saw the return of program staples, and then they did something that we really haven't seen an Izzo team do, and that is make it a focal point to get to the free throw line. And then we have seen Michigan State teams shoot free throws well before, and last year shot it exceptionally well. I think they were second in the conference behind Wisconsin. But that's an element. Getting to the line a lot is something that we haven't typically seen from Tom Izzo teams. So that was a nice new twist to add to all those program staples coming back. And when you put all of that in the mix, it was all good enough to overcome a number 319 finish in three-point shooting. That is the worst by a considerable margin, by the way, of the Tom Izzo era. He's never had, and of course the Ken Palm era. He's never had a team that finished sub 300 in three-point shooting. He had a handful, maybe 2 or 3 that were in the 200s. But normally Michigan State, if you look historically, normally Michigan State from a percentage basis, at least, shoots the 3 very well.
Yeah.
You know, had years where they've led the country, 2015, 2016. They were number 1 in percentage. I think it's important to note that one of the main reasons, though, that number didn't hurt them, besides the fact that they were so good everywhere else, is that no matter how efficient Michigan State is, they've never been a program that relies a ton on shooting them. So the impact, both ways, the impact of making a lot of threes on a percentage basis is good when it happens, but it's more muted because Michigan State doesn't take a lot of them. Same thing goes when you're in the other direction. Did it hurt them? Yes. Did it hurt them as much as, say, Illinois was hurt by poor three-point shooting? Not even close.
Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
volume wasn't anywhere near there. But regardless, the fact that you had a team that just did not shoot the jumpers well, it just didn't matter because Michigan State was so good everywhere else, and that it overcame it. And I would say there's a lesson in that. If you're trying to understand what Michigan State is, last year should tell you what to really focus on and what to maybe pay a little less attention to. And it's a hard thing for a lot of fans to do. I will say you still, there's been conversations on the Spartan Mag board focused on Jeremy Fears and his 3-point shooting, which
Right.
I've never seen as much conversation, a worry terms about a guy who shot 34% in my life. But regardless, and I understand it's a little more complicated than that, but with terms of volume and all of that. But my point is, if you're trying to understand what it takes for Michigan State to be successful, I would say 3-point shooting probably isn't in your top 5. And I know that's an anomaly for the modern era of basketball,
Right.
but it
For
also
sure.
happens
Yeah.
to be the truth. So, again, take a look at last year. That's going to answer that question pretty definitively for you, I would think, if you have an actual understanding of what the numbers are telling you. Does 3-point shooting matter? Sure. Does it matter as much as a whole host of other things? No. And that's one of the things that I think last year should have taught people. I know it didn't, because we'll have the same caterwauling the first time Michigan State goes 3 for 20 from 3, but that's reality, you know? Uh,
Yeah.
I think as we look forward to this year, it's an interesting situation because we all know there were some key components, particularly in the backcourt, that have been lost. You lost one guy to graduation, Jaden Akins. You lost another guy to the NBA and a first-round draft pick, Jase Richardson. And then you lost a player to the transfer portal in Tre Holloman, which was really, I would say, was the first time that Tom Izzo has lost a guy to the portal that he really, really wanted back and would have been a key part of the team. It's the first time we've seen it happen, and we'll discuss the whys in a minute, but there's definitely been some losses. You can't talk about losing 3 guys like that without realizing at both ends of the court how much it meant. But you've also got to remember, and Izzo has hammered this, I've noticed, as we're getting closer to the season, all his recent media opportunities that I've seen, he's been talking about the fact and highlighting the fact that they've got 4 guys back with starting experience. In
Right.
2025, that's a ton. That's a lot. So even with the losses from last year, and then there were other guys too, Frankie Fidler and Szymon Zapala, who were in the rotation. So 6 guys that were in your rotation gone. But by modern standards, there's still a lot of continuity with this team. It's once again going to be a veteran team. They should, at the very least, you could say they shouldn't be phased by road environments, by tough early
Right.
scheduling, any of those sorts of things. They've got enough experience collectively that I don't think those are going to be some of the issues you worry about with a younger team or a team that's sort of been thrown together, like it seems 90% of them are these days. Uh,
Yeah.
you shouldn't have those problems at Michigan State. That doesn't mean everything, but it means something. So I would say my expectation is this should be a team which once again looks coherent and of single-minded purpose. Those guys, and even a couple who were playing a lot last year but will this year, they now know. They don't have to be told, well, this is what you got to do in order to win. They know because they did it. So whether that's enough to repeat last season's success or even improve on it, that's anybody's guess. But I do think continuity matters. We just had Robbie Hummel as a guest, and we mentioned that point. Said, look, if you view the last 3 years in particular, which is really the bulk of the portal era that we're in the midst of, you've got Purdue winning the league twice by 3 games, and then Michigan State doing it by 3 games. And we said these are really the only 2 programs in the league that you could say emphasize, to the exclusion of other approaches, retention and development. And is that an accident? Is that just a coincidence that those have been the 2 teams that have won and won big? or is there something to the value of that? And he agreed that there's clearly something to the value of doing those things, particularly when the competition isn't. So,
Right.
I think all of that you've got to say that gives Michigan State, at the very least, a chance to be an upper tier team in this league once again. And, perhaps if things go really well, to even find a way to compete for a title. I don't think MSU on paper stacks up really, really close to Purdue, uh, because Purdue has all those aspects that we're talking about, plus a lot more in the way of production. But I do think it makes Michigan State competitive with everybody else. So that's
Yeah.
where I'm at entering the season.
Yeah. Well, and if you have them ranked second, you basically they're better than everybody else, obviously.
But that's
And
close. That doesn't really tell the whole story, because what I would say is there's Purdue, in my mind at least, there's Purdue. There's a pretty substantial gap, like maybe 3 games worth again, that kind of thing. And then there's a group of a lot of teams, a lot more than last
right.
year even, that I think you could see a path to second place for a whole bunch of them. I'm giving Michigan State that benefit for reasons that we'll articulate as we go through, but and I've already talked about. But the gap is much smaller.
Sure. Yeah, and then I guess just going back to 3-point shooting, because it's one of the more obvious things as a fan just watching casually in the game. You can it's easy to keep track of, and you can and knowing what the defensive efficiency is it's not obvious. It's like that's a culmination of all sorts of different aspects of the game. Steals and rebounding, and obviously just defending twos and threes and all those sorts of things. So it's real easy to it's more nebulous, I guess, for just like someone casually watching the game, where you can, watching a guy miss a shot, that's pretty obvious. And especially if everybody's missing the same type of shot, it becomes clear. And I certainly think with the year before, which was Jeremy Fear's freshman year, the 3-point shooting was an issue because they didn't do the other things very well. And so it became a very obvious problem, especially the season as dreadful as they were 2 years ago. They didn't have enough other stuff to overcome that. And so I think it just sort of lingers with the fan base, like, oh no, here's, the last year 3-point shooting was really a problem. And there's a lot of consternation over it, even though they're winning all those games.
But that team ended up 2 years ago. That team ended up shooting the
Yeah,
three.
no, I know they did.
They had a rough start, terrible start, but by the end of the season, the numbers were pretty good. Yeah, and I would say, but yet, did you feel like the team had improved all that much? I would argue not really. And it was because they didn't do some of these other things so well. You're absolutely right about the diagnosis, in my opinion. Why is it something that so many fans get obsessed by? It's because it's the easiest thing to understand. Because all you got to do is watch, say, well, they take the shot. Did they make it or did they miss it? That's it. There's nothing more subtle, or nothing requiring any kind of deeper understanding at all to grasp. But I would argue it still shouldn't be that, particularly, this is my problem, for Michigan State fans to not understand, defense and rebounding really matters in this program. It doesn't in some others. John Beilein had very good success for a long time, even in years where his teams didn't guard anybody and they didn't offensive rebound at all. So I'm not saying that's a necessity for every basketball team in the world to excel in those areas in order to be successful. But at Michigan State, it is. Always has been, likely always will be, as long as Tom Izzo's there.
Yeah.
Right? So I just don't think there's an excuse for Michigan State fans to not get it. And yet they do. So I realize I'm tilting at windmills here, people. I've been doing it for a long time. So it's probably not going to stop, but I can't help myself when I see things that to me are so obvious, and yet we have the collective amnesia that goes on every off season, and come November, right back
Yeah,
where they
well,
started. It's like you got to relearn the lessons every single year.
it's tough when in the
And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it's
yeah,
also
well, it's tough during
reality.
the
So
game.
I
You
got
know,
to
you
accept.
they keep track and they'll show those stats because it's an easy thing to show
I don't,
on the during the
hey,
broadcast or whatever.
I don't fault. I look, all those who participate in message boards know there are these things called game threads. I try to
Yeah.
stay out of those for the most part because I understand the emotion. Look, I'll cop to this. There may have been occasionally things I have said during in the midst of a game that I wouldn't be proud of. Okay, we're all subject to the emotion of the moment. That I get. I don't love it, but I get it. I'm talking about the day after, 2 days after, 2 weeks
Right.
after. That's what there's no excuse for. But anyway, bottom line is, if you're trying to figure out what's going to lead this team to success and what's really gonna matter a lot, don't focus so much on three-point shooting.
All right. Well, let's start talking about some departing players. This course brought to you by the Swedish Squad of Grand Rapids. If you need your windows cleaned, whether it's your home, your business, maybe a high rise, maybe you are the person in charge of State Capitol. They use the Swedish Squad of Grand Rapids to take care of the windows, make sure they're squeaky clean. Also, they can do power wash in your home, so make sure your home is nice and clean before the winter comes here. It's not too far away at this point, so make sure you get that taken care of. If you contact us through the support page at tffinots.com/support. You can get a link to Troy and his team. And again, they do fantastic work, but you get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when getting your estimate. So do that today. You'll be very glad you did. They've taken care of my house, and our windows are still clean even a year later because it's something that, frankly, I don't know how many people are actually clearing the windows, especially the second story. So this way you can keep you off the ladders. All right, so let's talk about the departing players. And of course, we'll start with Jase Richardson, probably the most obvious. He was the biggest surprise, I think, for the season. Well, certainly for Michigan State. It was a player that, when we were going into the season, we wondered who was going to have more minutes. It was going to be him or we Kur Teng at the guard spot. It was him, obviously. And then he just forced his way into the starting lineup by midway through the season because he was so efficient, so good. He was probably the only reliable 3-point shooter by the end of the season that the team had. And there wasn't anything that he didn't do. He defended, he would rebound, he could handle the ball when needed. He could do hit from 2, hit from 3, hit free throws. He could force contact in the lane. So, there's nothing. Well, there's a reason why he went in the first round of the NBA, basically, despite his limitation, which you'll say maybe is his size and the fact that he was not playing point. And at his size in the NBA, you probably are going to be expected to play point. But I don't know if he'll be successful in the NBA, but I certainly think he's got a reasonable chance.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of doubts, and the early returns I've seen, at least from exhibition games, he's been doing exactly the same things he did at Michigan State, playing very efficiently. Uh, he was, I mean, I go back a long way in Michigan State basketball, and I truly mean this. I struggle to think of a freshman, a true freshman, who looked as comfortable and played as intelligently and efficiently as Jase Richardson did. For me, and this might sound hyperbolic, but I really don't think it is. I, I I'm straining to think. I think I've got to probably go back to Magic to find one who was as good or better in those ways. Now, obviously, you could point to guys that might, someone like Miles Bridges as a freshman.
Yeah.
Okay, projectability, there was more athleticism, there's more size, and yet he was also very skilled and all of that. I get that. Gary Harris was incredibly actually, Gary Harris would probably be the guy, in fairness, a better comparison for Jase, because Magic is another realm. But you'd at least have to go back to Gary Harris
Yeah.
to find somebody as a freshman was that together. I mean, we can, and we all know, I'm sure everybody listening can flash on, several moments in the season where you saw this from Jase Richardson. I just remember to me things that were as subtle as the way when he would be penetrating, he would consistently square his body to the rim
Right.
to give himself the best possible chance of finishing a shot at the basket through traffic. That's a subtle thing, and there are a lot of guys who've been playing 4 years in college who don't do that. He was doing that immediately. The assist to turnover ratio, he was never the primary ball handler, but they did give him more of those responsibilities as the year moved along, and he ended up with almost a 2.5 to 1 ratio. It was really impressive. You mentioned the three-point shooting. Obviously, he was a 40% plus three-point shooter. It's funny to say, but that was something like as recently as maybe his junior year in high school, jump shooting was kind of considered a question mark for him.
Right.
He obviously worked at it to the point where it's now clearly a strength. He wasn't their best defensive guard, but that was a fast track he was running on that team. He was very good for a freshman. I would say great in terms of how quickly he adjusted. He did have a knack for rebounding, I thought, and he was definitely part of the reason why Michigan State's rebounding at both ends was improved because their perimeter group did a better job, and he was part of that. You can't say enough good things. I mean, it's a shame because I think if there was a reason for him to have come back, we would be talking about somebody that I think would be getting All-American accolades this
For
year
sure.
in the preseason.
Yeah.
And I honestly think he was good enough that, to me, Braden Smith at Purdue is the clear-cut player of the year favorite coming into the season. If Jase Richardson was back, I don't think that would be the case. I would give him a legitimate shot because I think his counting numbers, the scoring average, would have exploded. But he was too good for that. So he went into the draft. You cannot question the decision. I think it's so far so good,
Yeah.
He's proving even in the early going that he was ready. And I'm not surprised by that. I don't know where the ceiling is for him as a pro, whether it's going to be, just a solid rotation guy or whether he can be even more than that. I'm not even going to venture a guess, but I do know this. The only outcome I would be surprised by is that he doesn't have a very long and very good NBA career in whatever role he's in. And frankly, whatever that we used to say it during the season after we interviewed him, like we could see it in the summer. Like that kid is going to be successful at whatever he wants to do.
Yeah. He's going to win life.
Yeah, from what I understand, he achieved academically while he was at Michigan State. I'd be shocked if he seems obviously to be the kind of guy that I would expect probably does go and get his degree before he's done, at some point during his NBA career. But yeah, you just can't say there's nothing negative. There's nothing that you could say about him. Only, I guess, that our time with him was too short.
Yes,
That's
for
it.
sure. Yeah, and I guess the only thing you would say is that you would love to have another year, and would it have been worth not having Jeremy Fears in order to have another year of Jase Richardson? Probably not. You kind of need both those players. So that's
I don't,
that's
but I
a
got to tell
difficult
you,
thing.
if by that you mean, well, would the idea of being able to play point guard full time have kept him? I don't think so. I do think, what was interesting is the way things unfolded. Had he returned, he would have been the obvious candidate to play the backup point guard minutes
Sure.
behind you. And so there would have been an opportunity because you mentioned his size. That was the one knock, and it caused him to slip a little bit in the NBA draft projections where he ended up getting picked. Because there was a point before they had the combine and did the measurements where Jase was, I mean, people were talking about him as a lottery guy.
Yeah.
It was getting to that point. And then it slipped a little bit from that. And that was all due to size. So he's going to have to be a point guard at the next level. But I think it's not like Michigan State was in a position to offer him 25, 30 minutes a game at that spot. And, then it becomes a question of, well, is it better for you to get those minutes and learn playing college, or can you do that and get paid at the pro level as opposed to the NIL level? And I think the answer there was pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Plus, I honestly don't think it's going to take him very long. That's not a project to me to say we got to turn Jase Richardson into a point guard. I think that's just a matter of getting more reps. He played it in high school. I saw it.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't think it's going to be an issue, but no, I don't think, and that would never be, obviously, that would never be something Michigan State would do, run off a guy they think could be a cornerstone of the program, in order to get a year to maybe convince a guy to do that. But yeah, best of luck to him at the next level. I think he's going to be another one of these guys that makes MSU fans very, very proud with what he does at the next level and beyond.
Yeah. And certainly, as you mentioned, as our conversation with them, a great human being as far as we could tell. I mean, just like a guy who's going to win at life in
just
general.
extreme, and you saw it all year long in the interviews, which started to become more frequent as he was having more success. Just the way he carries himself. I used to make this comparison, and I don't want to go too far with it, but he really does. There are aspects of him that really reminded me of someone like Joe Dumars, where, when Joe Dumars was like in his early 20s in the NBA, he seemed like he was a 10-year vet. He seemed like a guy who was in his 30s. Just the way he talked, the way he handled himself, you sensed a maturity and a steadiness, which wasn't always true of some of his teammates, as much as I loved that team. But that's Jase Richardson. I mean, yeah, he's still he's still a kid because, he had the focus on he and Coen Carr spending their time at their apartment building Legos, right?
Right.
So there were aspects of him that were very much still a young person, but boy, the way he carried himself when you talked to him, I felt like I was talking to a real full-fledged adult. And that's just, that's a credit to him. That's a credit to his parents. They did a great job with him by everything I can see. And yeah, I mean, you just can't, you see what we're doing as we're talking about him. It's just, you can't help but gush over everything, the total package with him.
Yeah.
And I think that as much as anything else, it's not just the talent, although that's formidable. It's all these other aspects to him as a personality, as a person. I can't see betting against him being successful.
Yeah.
In
No,
the
I
NBA.
totally agree.
I think he's gonna find a way.
And that kind of leads right into our next player who's departing, senior Jaden Akins, who ended up leading the team. Jase had average 12.1 points a game. Akins had 12.8 points a game to lead the team in scoring, which is, not a massive amount of points. And that just was a reflection of the team, as if the scoring was, very spread out. He ended up shooting 40, 29, and 76. The 29 obviously is the one that sticks out quite a bit. He just never got back to where he was as a freshman or a sophomore with his three-point shooting, but he's able to do everything else. And by all accounts, too, from a character standpoint, he's an easy guy to root for. He's a guy who, despite not being able to shoot and despite having a guy come on, a freshman, who took the limelight basically from what should have been a season I think would have been a highlight, where he was the spotlight was on Jaden. He seemed comfortable with it and did everything else in order to have a successful team. Rebounded, did all the things, and defended like crazy, did everything else. And so for that reason, he was instrumental to them being successful as they were. Although people will point to that three-point shooting, that was one aspect of his game that was not good, but everything else about it was tremendous.
Yeah, I think in totality, he had a really good senior year. And I want to echo some of what you were saying there. Jaden Akins absolutely could have left a couple times. And I can tell you, there were people in his world, I'm not saying everybody, but there were people in his world that would have liked to have seen that happen for two reasons. One, because there was a feeling at one point in his career that, well, he needs to be in a position where a program is going to put the ball in his hands.
Yeah.
A lot. Allow him to play through pick and roll. Kind of the role that during a couple of his years here that Tyson Walker played. That was kind of the thought. It was, well, Tyson's getting all those reps. Jaden needs, and he's not getting them at Michigan State. And then the other thing obviously would be money. I'm positive there would have been somebody willing to pay him more than he made at Michigan State. Probably multiple somebodies. Because remember, as a sophomore, especially, and to some extent as a junior, he did shoot the three very well. But he stuck it out. And he was a program guy. And I think it is worth highlighting something you talked about there, especially as the year went along. I think two things became apparent. One was that it wasn't going to be a perfect fit for Jaden to be the go-to guy. As you mentioned, he still led the team in scoring, but he wasn't a go-to guy, right? Michigan State didn't force the ball to him. He didn't force up shots to an extent that it hurt the team. I think he was the most aggressive we'd ever seen him, but that was okay. They needed him to be that.
Yeah.
But it still wasn't like, oh, Jaden Akins is option one. That wasn't happening. The other thing is that as the season went along, it became apparent that the one guy who kind of did have that in him was Jase Richardson. And Jaden didn't fight any of that. He played. I mean, if you call somebody a role player, it feels like you're denigrating them to some extent. That's the last thing I intend to do by saying that. But I do think Jaden found a comfortable spot. Yes, he was aggressive offensively enough. The most aggressive he'd ever been in terms of
For sure.
taking the ball to the basket,
Getting free
drawing
throws.
foul shot opportunities. Big step forward for him in that respect. And that offset some of the struggles with the jumper. He was really good in transition. So he contributed all of those things. And defensively, he was sensational. Jaden Akins his whole career at MSU was a good defender, but he took the step up to great last year. In my opinion, he probably should have been Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. He didn't get it. I think he should have.
Yeah.
Because I think when you look at the variety of guys he guarded, and it's hard. It's hard for guards to win that who don't have huge steal numbers.
Right. I was going to say that's the one obvious stat that you can get, right?
Because it is for perimeter guys, but the number that really gets people voting for that category going is blocked shots, which again is, in my opinion, not a great measurement of overall defensive impact. Like I'll talk about a little later. In my opinion, Carson Cooper was and will be the best defensive five man in the league. He doesn't even average one block shot per game.
Right.
So what? That's not the most important thing a five does in a world where pick and roll dominates college basketball. It's just not. And for someone like Jaden Akins, steals as a measurement of what he's doing defensively? No. You're demonstrating you don't really understand the game very well if you think that. The versatility that he showed and just the flat out ability to force guys he's guarding into taking shots they don't want to take. That's what matters. And he did that exceptionally well last year. So I think those things, he also rebounded the best he ever has.
I was going to say that was a new development too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, he was a guy that for 3 years, I'm looking at him and saying, this guy should be rebounding like Charlie Bell. He's got the same tools. Why isn't it happening? And it finally kind of did. I think he averaged 3.5 boards a game last year. It's pretty good. So I think even with the shooting, I understand people being disappointed that a guy who had shot it better at different points in his career didn't have a great shooting year as a senior. But man, everything else was great.
All right, then we'll move on to Tre Holloman. So Tre, this is an interesting one to talk about because so Tre ended up transferring to North Carolina State after the season, as we talked about before. It's sort of the first player that is an era where there was not a mutual sort of understanding about the departure. Tre averaged 9.1 points a game, 3.4 assists per game, which were second on the team. He shot 37, 33, and 85. So definitely the 3-point shot was not nearly as good as it was the previous year. And he's definitely more, I don't know, I feel like he was streaky the year before, but even seemed more streaky the last season. And the other thing too, I think he was super efficient as far as assist turnovers the previous year. And last season, he had a lot more turnovers. And so he's not quite his ratio from assist turnovers was not quite as good.
It's true, but he was, I think just to interrupt for a second, I think the
Sure.
measurement there, I was okay with that, even though at times it was very frustrating to watch because it was a function of him trying to be more dynamic. And that's always the balance you're going to strike. You know, people may not realize this, but Irvin Johnson committed a fair amount of turnovers in his career. He did. And it was because he was constantly trying to make things happen. And when you do that as a point guard, there are going to be more mistakes. The key is, are you making enough good things happen? You know?
Right. Yeah. And I guess, how much trouble does your turnover cause? Is it like just someone steals a ball and they go and get an easy layup, or you just throw it in the stands occasionally? Yeah, the throw ahead and you just miss Coen Carr, which seems impossible, but it does happen at times. The other, of course, highlights for Tre's season, the two things that come out. One is the finish, the half court shot at Maryland to beat Maryland and basically secure a Big Ten title for Michigan State. And then after that, at the final home game against Michigan, where Tre defended the logo as Michigan players were standing at Kason and was it Fat Brooks? We're standing at the
Eldred Kason and Darrell Brooks.
Yeah. We're standing at half court, apparently not knowing what was going on. And so Tre, pushed him off the half court, caused a little fracas there. And I think before we go into talk about Tre, when we talked to Robbie Hummel recently, he mentioned what I think we had felt about with Tre. That
he said exactly that.
He said exactly what we said, right? The fact that he would have gotten a drink, free drink, whatever, at Michigan State. And yeah, that's something. And there's no question, if you go show up at any bar in East Lansing for the rest of his life, people are going to give him a free drink or whatever. And you're like, well, that's not worth so much. But I would say there is that the endearment to the fan base would have been cemented had he come back this year and had a decent season. Really almost, whatever he'd done, he would have been beloved forever. And there is a value in that I think is beyond what he's probably getting paid at Norton NC State. It's just a guess. There's no way to know. You can't know the counterfactual. But I think that was also what Robbie was getting to the point, trying to make the point of. It was not just the, hey, he's going to be loved by everyone, which everyone wants to be loved, I suppose. But from a financial standpoint and, doors opening for your career and those sorts of things would be much, much easier had he stuck around. But again, you can't ever know what it's would have been. And so he ends up in NC State largely because he wanted to have a prominent role as a point guard, and which I guess we don't know for sure if that's actually going to happen.
Well, it does look like there was a point where it looked like it might not. They were going heavily after PJ Haggerty long after he had committed there. That didn't end up happening. But if that had happened, it goes to show you, if you're putting trust in a guy like Will Wade, good luck to you. Really, I mean, sorry, that's the truth. Look, everybody's got their priorities. And I don't think it's fair or accurate to say that there can't be differences of opinion on those fronts where both sides would have some legitimacy. If Tre Holloman and those around him, which there's nothing nefarious, we're talking about, his parent. If they feel that he needed the opportunity to be the guy at that position rather than, play mostly off the ball and then get some backup minutes. Okay. I mean, that's not illegitimate. I can disagree
Right.
with it, and I do disagree with it, but so what? That's my opinion. That doesn't matter. The opinion that matters is the opinion of the people that are directly involved. And so I don't begrudge him making the decision on that basis, uh, because that's apparently the highest priority to him. What's not as high a priority, uh, clearly, are the things that you just discussed and that we had talked about when this all happened. And then Robbie Hummel, unprompted by us, repeated. And that's a guy who really knows because he's been in those positions
Right.
and knows the value. What does it mean to you to be a guy who was loved by a program? And, Robbie Hummel had a really good career, obviously, but he's not the greatest player to ever play at Purdue. I think he would probably tell you that. There have been
Right.
guys that have had better careers, yet is there a more beloved guy in that program? At least in the Painter era, I don't know that there is. And, would that have that wouldn't have happened if he had decided to transfer, even when it was more difficult in his era. But, look, I think this, and I think we said this at the time. Is Tre Holloman gonna be a guy who comes back for grind week in the future? I would bet he does. Because you look at guys like Chris Allen and Corey Lucius who have done exactly that multiple times now. And I think that's a pretty good indicator. I cannot see a world where, Tom Izzo said that guy's dead to me. That's not the case. But so it's not that he's cut off, and I think he did come back this summer. I think he was at Moneyball.
That was
One
he came
right.
back from Moneyball, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember hearing that kids were getting his autograph, and there was there was no hostility at all from what I recall hearing. I think he might have even been interviewed by somebody. Uh, but at the same time, it's not going to be the same. He was in position. If he had come back, uh, he would have gone down as one of if not the most beloved non-star players. And by the way, there's no
For sure.
guarantee he wouldn't have had a star like senior year. He could have had a very big year this season. That would have been possible. I wouldn't have ruled that out. But even if he did, just for those two events you mentioned, particularly the latter one. I mean, the half court shot,
Yeah,
great.
for sure.
But guys have made those that stuff has happened on occasion before. The Michigan stuff, that's what set him up to be a guy, to have a his own niche in Michigan State basketball history. That was it. And yeah, he still did that and people still appreciate it, but it doesn't ring the same way now with him having transferred out. So I I think the whole thing's unfortunate, but as I said, people are free to honor whatever priorities they feel motivated by. And in his case, it wasn't, I got to get away from Tom Izzo or I hate Michigan State fans, anything like that that would really, if it was that kind of stuff. And he, to his credit, I don't recall hearing him sling mud publicly about Michigan State after he left. So I think he's, as best as he can, I think he's handled it reasonably well from what I could tell. Um, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of year he has and playing in a program that, in my opinion, could not be more different than what he's been in terms of what, not even necessarily the on the court stuff. Although Will Wade plays a different style too, but just what the program is built on. I I don't, when I think about Tom Izzo, I think about Michigan State. you know, without even having to say it, what the cornerstone beliefs are. I don't know what Will Wade believes in other than the glorification of Will Wade. I have no idea. And the PJ Haggerty thing we were alluding to was proof of that. If they went aggressively after him, and my understanding was the only reason they didn't get him is that they weren't willing to go as high in the bidding. They were after him. If they had landed him, where was Tre? Right back where he started.
Yeah.
In terms of this priority that mattered so much to him. That's the risk you take. You know what you're getting when you go to Michigan State. A lot of these other places you don't. And it's good for
Yeah.
Tre that it
Right.
didn't work out negatively in that respect. It looks like he's going to get every chance to be the primary point guard. But man, you are rolling the dice when you step outside the friendly confines of East Lansing in respect to a lot of this stuff. I just hope it works out well for him personally. I mean, I'm not going to be rooting for it, but I don't want to see him, go through a bad year or suffer that stuff. I don't think I think that kind of vindictiveness doesn't reflect well on Michigan State fans to have that. But yeah, it's unfortunate for MSU because I think Tre obviously would have been a starter and they would have approached the portal differently, which we might look back on and say, boy, that was really a silver lining, him leaving, because it caused them to bring in some other guys we'll talk about that maybe end up contributing in an even better way than Tre might have. You never know. But he would have been a starter. He would have played a ton. I think he would have been a guy that would have asked to score more. He would have had more shot opportunities this year just because of the way the rotation would work. And then there's the legacy stuff that I think you're going to what if it,
Yep. There's any question about that. All right, let's move on to the next player's departure is Xavier Booker. And I think there's nothing you can say except it was a pretty big disappointment for him for a sophomore year from what I think the expectations were. After his freshman year, it looked like he was coming along. The 6'10" forward ended up averaging 4.7 points a game, 2.2 rebounds a game, shot 42, 23, and 79. The three-point shooting is something that it was sort of his calling card coming in that he had, and he just was not able to ever dial in that shot. He kind of looked like he sort of maybe figured it out when I was against North Carolina. And then after that, he just, I guess, got the dwindles. He just was less and less effective when he was out on the floor. And he just had his minutes just disappear as the other players were more effective. And the things that he was able to bring to you, namely offense and scoring, he just wasn't able to bring. And that's just, I think, was sort of sealed his fate to the point where I think he played in the NCAA tournament, but maybe just the first game. And then I don't think he logged minutes after that.
He was out of the rotation even late in the regular season too.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we know, you've had Michigan State coaches allude to it. They won't say it definitively, but I know it's a fact. There was a point during last season where, and I think it was when they were well into the Big Ten schedule, but where the coaches were looking at each other and saying, man, maybe we want to take the red shirt off Jesse McCulloch and give him those minutes than Book, which said it all. Instead, Michigan State did not do that, which I think was the right move, both for the program and for the player. And they just shortened the rotation a little bit. They just moved Book out of that rotation. It also happened that, some of those minutes that he was getting at the 4 started to go to Frankie Fidler. And that, as we'll talk about in a second, we'll talk about next, that ended up producing good results for Michigan State. I don't know if you remember, we were at the UCLA game in Westwood. There was a Michigan State fan right in front of us who was with a bunch of UCLA fans. There was a point in the second half where he asked me, he said, would you play Booker here? And I looked at him like he was crazy. And no, that Frankie Fidler is fighting. He's competing. Book isn't competing. And it was kind of at about that point in the season, like the beginning of February, that Book's role started to shrink. It's
Yeah.
Look, it's a tough one. By all accounts, Xavier Booker is a great kid and good student. There's a lot to like about him as a person. And when you see him play, there are aspects to his game that make it very easy to understand why people were excited about him. And I also give him credit for not only going to a place initially where he knew he was going to be ridden hard, but his transfer decision to go to UCLA. Mick Cronin is not going to play patty cake. You know, he's another guy who coaches very hard, and the expectations for effort type things and toughness is high. And so I give him credit for that too. But Booker is not, he's not taking the easy route, which is,
Right.
it shows a level of maturity and also that he's got good people around him. So I give him credit for all of that. And I do hope for his sake that it works out at UCLA, and I hope he's productive. I hope they find a way to tap in whatever wasn't working at Michigan State, that a new location, a new environment, just something clicks. I have my doubts about that,
Yeah.
but I hope it does.
Yeah. So Liza is not in East Lansing when they
Right.
come and visit. That I'm not.
He
Okay.
he just it's too bad because, as you mentioned, late in his freshman year, he seemed to be starting to get it. Like, you saw
Yeah.
him in those cameos he would have, you saw, okay, there's progression here. He's playing with a little more toughness. He's competing a little harder at the big man type stuff, right? But I do think you'll hear coaches say that for a lot of guys, offense dictates defense. And you could broaden that to offense dictates everything else. Dictates defense, dictates rebounding, dictates willingness to get on the floor after a loose ball. That there are a lot of guys where the shot is falling and then they'll pick up those other areas, but the shot is not falling. They let that seep into everything else. And I do think that
Yeah.
was some of Xavier Booker's problem last year. I can't know that unless I was in his head, but that's what it looked like to me. The 3-point shot was not as good, not as efficient as it had been as a freshman. And I think when he was out, and the one thing he never had issues with was confidence in his shot. Like, you knew if Book saw the floor, first half open look he got, he was going to take.
Yeah.
And not enough of those were falling. And I think that bled into these other areas, and that's why it seemed like there was a regression going on. So I think that's going to be the key for Mick Cronin is, can he find a way to get him to totally disregard whatever success or failures he's having as a shooter and just consistently apply more energy and effort in those other areas, because that's what's going to make or break it for Xavier Booker, is how well can he rebound? How well can he defend? That's going to, UCLA is talking about playing him pretty much exclusively, I think, at the 5. There's a lot of progress.
We'll see, right?
Yeah, there are a
Stay
lot of
tuned.
changes that would have to happen, in my opinion, in order to make that viable in a league like the Big Ten. Because, we saw it for 2 years. If you put him up against a real, like, imagine Book trying to guard Trey Kaufman around in the post. He's not even going to play the 5 this year for Purdue. But imagine a guy, just as an example, a guy like that, or a Nate Biddle, somebody like that. He's going to get overwhelmed. So there's got to be, a continued physical development, but also a mentality change. And I just don't know if I expect that that's going to happen, but we'll see. And I hope it does for his sake.
Yeah. I think you told us at the beginning of the season that Michigan State's going to win the Big Ten by 3 games. We both would have been 100% sure that Xavier Booker had a big year. That he
Absolutely.
had made the jump,
Absolutely.
right?
Look, he was a
So
starter.
shows what we
He
know.
went from being a starter at the beginning of the season to out of the rotation. That tells you the whole deal right there.
Yeah, exactly. All right, one of the players you just mentioned is Frankie Fidler. Frankie was a transfer coming in from the University of Omaha in Nebraska. He was, I think, but most people, or many people at least, expect him to be the leading scorer for this team going into the season. Yeah, I know you did, but you weren't alone. I mean, there are a lot of people who certainly thought that. He ended up averaging 7 points a game, 3.3 rebounds a game, shot 39, 20, and 86. Now, the 86 is one that we expected. We expected him to get a lot of free throw attempts. And when he started the season, he did have a lot of free throw. I mean, he was averaging 4 or 5 a game, I think. But his shooting was so bad. I mean, 20% from three. And that's with him hitting a couple late in the season, I think. I mean, early in the season, he was down in the teens for sure.
Yeah.
And to his credit, he became a guy who was not only willing to come off the bench, but he did the things that he wasn't doing early in the season. He was out there really hustling and competing hard, getting rebounds, defending. And not to say he wasn't doing those things early in the season, but I think he just, within the Michigan State system, I think he wasn't comfortable, in the flow of things defensively and whatever. So he was able to fight his way back after pretty much almost completely falling out of the rotation, to kind of fight his way back in to be a fairly reliable guy coming off the bench. Again, still not a guy who's going to come in and hit many shots, which was disappointing, certainly with his career at Omaha, being able to shoot. But we've talked about this plenty of times. Guys come in from the mid-majors. They are great shooters. They get to the major leagues, and it may not work out the way you think it is. And so that was I'm sure if he looks back, that'd be the tough way for him to look back and, boy, if I could only hit those shots. But he did find a way to contribute and be a positive impact on the team.
I think he's an example and I remember there was one other one of these forever ago that I felt that way about, and Izzo talked about it. His first Big Ten championship team, he had a guy named DeJuan Wiley, who was the starting center. And DeJuan Wiley had been a JUCO transfer, so he only had 2 years. He was there Izzo's second year and then his third year. And the third year, of course, was 97, 98 when he won his first Big Ten championship. DeJuan Wiley's first year, he struggled. And he was struggling a little bit in the beginning of the second year, but about the time Big Ten schedule kicked in, he figured it out. And he was really good the rest of the way. And I remember Izzo saying, this is what I hate about the JUCO stuff because I don't get another year with him. He's finally figured it.
Right.
And it takes a while for transfers. That was his argument was, look, it takes a year for these guys to really figure it out. And just at the point that they have figured it out, they're done. Well, I feel similarly about Frankie Fidler. If Frankie Fidler was back coming into this year, I'd be really excited about him. Not that I would expect that he would be, we obviously had it wrong. And that happens with mid-major guys. You just never know which guys are going to thrive and which guys aren't in terms of their scoring and their role and all of that. Coming into last year, I think people were generally much more excited about Frankie Fidler than they were John Tonje. How's that look now?
No question.
That's the difficulty with the portal. But I would be excited about him because, as you were talking about, he figured it out. He carved out a role through playing hard. He rebounded very well at time.
Yep.
He had a knack for drawing fouls, not as much as we thought, but that was more a function of reduced minutes. I thought he was like a 25-minute a night guy, and he was probably closer to, I don't know what he was down the stretch. He was probably closer to 12 to 15. But he could get to the rim, he could finish plays, he could draw contact, he was very good. And even though the three-point shot was a struggle, his mid-range got better as the year went on. And he competed. And they found that playing him as a small ball 4 was working at both ends of the court. So I would have been excited for him to be back as just another card in the deck, so to speak, another piece that, okay, what you can get out of this guy. It's not superstar stuff, but he can play a role. He can do certain things at a high enough level that he's going to help you win games. That's how I saw it. And unfortunately, that's not a possibility because he's out of eligibility. And it took him half a year, and it took Michigan State half a year to figure all of that out. But yeah, he definitely earned his ring in terms of the Michigan State getting that Big Ten title because Frankie was a productive part of this team, especially down the stretch.
Well, we'll talk about another player who did the same thing, who was a transfer into Michigan State and who earned his ring, so to speak. And that's Szymon Zapala, 7-footer, transferred in from Longwood. I think that's the school. Yeah. Ugh, sometimes it comes back to me. So he ended up having a little bit interesting year. I mean, I wasn't quite sure whether he was going to be a starter. He started a lot of games, but he didn't play starter minutes, I guess is what you'd say. He'd start, but he'd end up logging probably 10, 11 minutes, or just kind of depends on the flow of the game. And depends on the matchups. And so he averaged 4.3 points a game, 4 rebounds a game, shot 65% from the floor, 66% from the line. And to Michigan State's credit, he was probably the worst free throw shooter at 66%. So they had a very good year from the free throw line, which we mentioned earlier. And he was a guy, there's nothing expected of him initially. Then after the Spain trip, people were like, oh, this guy's he's got some ability to move and to play defense like Thomas wants. He's going to be more than just a guy to come in on rare occasions and back up at the 5. And so he played a nice role. He seemed to fit in well with the team, and we have him on the show. He's a super nice guy. He started ice hockey and realized that maybe not the best sport for guys 7 feet tall.
Yeah, unless he was a goalie. A lot of room in the net.
Big 5-hole.
Yeah, I look, very pleasant surprise because the expectations for him, I think, from pretty much everybody, and I think this might have even been true for Michigan State. I think when they brought him in, the idea was, all right, here's an insurance policy. Because they had Cooper, who had played a lot as a sophomore, a Kohler, who was coming back from an injury-riddled year and they knew was going to play, and they had Booker, who they thought was going to take a real step forward. So those are your 3 big guys. You know, Zapala was basically the insurance policy. But as they got him into the program, I think they realized, hey, no, this is a guy who can actually help us. And he did. As you say, he was starting, not playing starter minutes, but still, I think he must have averaged, I didn't look at this, but he must have averaged double-digit minutes. I would
think at least 12, 15.
I would assume he was in that, 12 to 15 range. But he was a really valuable piece to have on a team that, as we've said, didn't have got individuals standing out so much. It was a collective thing where each guy had a role that they played, and his role was, okay, give us some rebounding, take up space in the post, gives you a matchup with the bigger guys in this league. So at least you had someone besides Coop who physically could bang with legit bigs, like 6'10" and up kind of guys. That mattered. And frankly, going into this season, it's one of the things they didn't really do in the portal that I would have liked to have seen them try to do. And it may simply be that they didn't feel there was that kind of player available to them. That I'm sure that's a very likely possibility, but they didn't really try to sign a guy who would be that insurance policy, and if it goes the right way, play a similar kind of role to what Zapala did last year. Now, again, I don't want to miss the subtleties in that. There's a lot of reasons why they might have elected not to do that. Feeling that Cooper's game has grown, a lot of confidence in Jesse McCulloch, which I have too. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it was really nice to have Zapala there because you knew in a worst case scenario, foul trouble, injury, whatever, okay, this guy could go out there and physically he can match up and he can give us some things. He's not just taking up space. He's actually productive in certain areas. And so I thought it was a really good year from him. Better than I think anyone saw coming.
And then finally, for player departures, Gehrig Normand. Gehrig was on our show twice. He super nice guy, kind of a goofball. He was quite the cheerleader on the bench. He redshirted his freshman year, and so he's a redshirt freshman last year, 6'6", and got injured right before the season, which I think set him back a little bit. And he just never managed to get into this rotation, which was deep, but they had a quality level to it. I mean, heck, Kur Teng did make it out, and by all counts, he's a really good shooter. So he ended up transferring to Santa Clara. He only played short of 13 games. So we'll see if he has a little bit more success until he get on the floor and show what he can do.
Yeah, I think
this season.
that could be a good move for him. The issues for him, as I understand it, it largely came down to defensive strength. And I think strength, was something that is a concern for almost every freshman. Very rarely is it not. So that was known going in. The defensive stuff kind of surprised me because I thought, and this goes to show you never really know. You can look at a guy athletically, and I thought he's a good athlete. And
Yeah, he
so,
is.
you think, okay, if you've got that kind of athleticism, you should be able to be a reasonably good defender. And so I thought there was when we made the comparisons, hell, he made the comparisons to somebody like Matt McQuaid, who was similar size, also from Texas, had a similar kind of athletic profile. But it goes to show you can't just base it solely on that. Matt McQuaid, right away, got it defensively and was able to earn minutes as a true freshman because he could be reliable on defense. Whatever was happening with his offensive game, he could guard people. Gehrig never did that, and I think that's what hurt him. Look, we know Michigan State could have used a little more three-point shooting, right? We've talked about that. Well, Gehrig could do that, but he didn't get that chance because they felt like they couldn't trust him defensively. And again, some of that was strength related. Not all of it, but some of it. So I think him going down a level,
Right.
Santa Clara, you're in the WCC, it's going to be a little more forgiving. And I would be surprised if he doesn't get a chance to play at least with some more regularity, at least as a rotation guy at that level. And hopefully he'll have great success because, as you mentioned, we had him on the show twice, and he's a fantastic kid. He's funny. You mentioned his enthusiasm on the bench. He was obviously bought in to what the team was doing, but he wasn't sulking, at least not that we ever saw. So again, best wishes for him. I hope it goes great at Santa Clara.
Yeah, there's no question he had to make a move because it's hard to imagine seeing where minutes see this year or even the next.
The handwriting was on the wall.
He had to make some sort of decision.
They brought in Jordan Scott, and similar size, actually a little bigger, but similar size, similar kind of game as a shooter. So that's another guy coming up behind you that you would worry about. And then, of course, they're going to add guys in the portal. So I think it was the right decision.
All right, so then let's talk about returning players. This is brought to you by the Brothers Just Your Gutters. If you need your gutters taken care of, and who doesn't if you live in the state of Michigan, make sure the brothers take care of it. They just took care of my neighbor's house the other day. They're across the street from me. They took care of my gutters. I had tree growing my gutter. So if you want to take care of those problems, contact the Brothers Just Your Gutters. They do fantastic work, great pricing, professionals. They get in the ladders, take care of things. Maybe you don't need the gutters replaced. You just need something repaired. They can do that. They can clean them out, or put leaf guards on. They have little heaters to put on your gutters as well, so you don't get the ice dam, the icicles building up on the side too. So whatever you need done, they can take care of it. They should be your first call, whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state. Kurt and Greg have got you covered. You can find our ways to contact them at our support page at thefinalfour.theschedule.com/support. Make sure you mention Final Four to get 10% off your order. Okay, so let's begin with the most obvious returning player, I guess, is Coen Carr. He's a pretty decent athlete. Maybe he averages 8.1 points a game last season, 3.6 rebounds, played about 21 minutes, and shot through 61, 33, and 70. Obviously, the 33 is on fairly limited volume, but he did show the ability from his free throw shooting, which he must have started 35-40%, probably through the first, I'm going to say 7-8 games of the season. And then he was a guy you did not expect to miss. I mean, he ended up 70%, but he probably should have at 85% down the stretch of the season, along with the rest of the team. So his shot looked good. If anything, on his 3-point shot, it looks slow. And then, of course, everything else he does from an athletic standpoint on offense, the dunks, the flying down on the break. And we started seeing what we had hoped to see the year before. Well, two things. One is I think we saw a lot more of the defense, the understanding where you're supposed to do defensively. He's obviously a great athlete, but just because you're a great athlete doesn't mean you can defend people real well, because you can get fooled on pick and rolls or whatever. Also, and then he was able to rebound and do a lot of things from an offensive rebounding standpoint that we anticipated. And I think there's every reason I think for him, whether or not his 3-point shot is falling, but to expect to see improvements in the rest of his game. And I do expect improvements in the 3-point shot as well. But the other things, the rebounding and the ability to sort of score off the dribble, I think those could be some huge things, which I think is plenty of reasons to be very optimistic about this season coming in. And one of the reasons I think, if you expect Michigan State to do really well, I think you're going to have an improved Coen Carr on the offensive and defensive end.
Well, there's no question. I mean, he's gone from a support guy offensively to one of the main attractions. And I agree with you. It's hard to envision Michigan State having the kind of season they want to and expect to have without him doing those things. Now, the sky is literally the limit. Oh, a basketball player. But how close he gets to that ceiling is going to have a lot to do with what this team does collectively. He's a very important guy to them on a host of fronts. Now, I think it's worth noting, there's a lot of talk about, he's going to play almost exclusively at the 3 this year, and that's a challenge. And, is that making the best use of his game? And you're probably going to hear those debates at least for a little while the season is ongoing. Is Michigan State putting him in the best possible role for him to succeed? But honestly, he played that role last year pretty much. Yep. He didn't play a ton of 4, played some, but much more at the 3 than the 4. So I don't think that's as big a deal as it's maybe been made out to be in certain quarters. Offensively, I think now we are talking about not, okay, he has to develop these parts of his game as much as we are, he needs to find consistency. You know what I mean? And there is a difference. Like we've seen now the 3-point shot. His freshman year, that was a rumor. Last year, it was reality. We saw him take those shots. We saw him look good. And footage this offseason, Moneyball, et cetera, that's continued. And I think the release seems to be getting a little quicker too, which matters. But can he do that with more consistency? We know, or at least we anticipate, the volume is going to increase. So I'd be fine with 33% from 3 from him, with him taking maybe 3 or 4 3-pointers in a game. Yeah. That would work.
Right.
So can he do that consistently? Even more important to his overall offensive impact than that, in my opinion, though, is can he do the things that he showed off the dribble with more frequency this year? Because we saw it from him, and in fairness, we saw it more and more the further along the season went. He got a knack for when he's got his mind to it, set to it, to get to the rim. And then when he gets to the rim, it's over. Yeah. Like he doesn't even have to be at the rim. He could be 5 feet away from the rim, and that's still a dunk or a layup because of who he is athletically. So he has some gifts physically that make him just, I mean, again, the sky is the limit in terms of what he can be as that kind of player if he's continued to work on his handle and his mindset is right. That, he has those moments where he says, I'm getting to the basket, and he does. Well, we just need to see that with more frequency. So you see what I'm saying? It's about consistency. And if he's doing that, he's going to get to the free throw line more often. Well, can he continue to shoot free throws at a reasonable rate? If he does that consistently, that's going to help. Can he be even more of a factor as a rebounder, especially offensively? I feel like he's just scratched the surface in terms of what he can be as a weapon in that way, you know? So it's about consistency. It's not about, well, we haven't seen him do these things yet. We've seen him do everything that he needs to be able to do to be a very, very good player. It's just, can we see more of it? Defensively, he's had moments. I remember that game against Rutgers where he really took Ace Bailey away.
Yeah.
Can he be that guy? Can he get closer to that Brandon Dawson level of game in, game out consistency? Because I'm telling you, his physical package is very similar in that, BJ Dawson could guard all different kinds of players. Well, Coen Carr, in theory, could do some similar things in terms of his versatility. Can he do that night in, night out? They need him to. Perimeter defense is where Michigan State lost as much as any area from last year's team when you look at the guys they lost. So they need guys that are going to be playing those minutes to step up and try to get as close as they can to that level. Coen Carr is a big part of that. So
Yeah.
I think he's going to have a really good year. I expect it, and he needs to.
Yeah. And he's the kind of guy that if at the end of the season he ends up averaging 15 points a game, shoots 37% from three with reasonable volume and, pulling down 5 boards a game, you wouldn't be totally shocked. I mean, it's definitely, you see the part there that it's there, and just like, can he unlock it? Can it be sort of everything that we think it could be? And so, yeah, it's going to be very exciting. I think he's probably the most intriguing player for Michigan State coming back. I think you're expecting lots of improvement from other players, but for players who can move to a level that is, maybe all Big Ten sort of level, he definitely has the components that could do that. Whether that ends up happening or not is, remains to be seen.
Absolutely. And look, there's lots of examples of this over Michigan State history. It doesn't always happen with every guy, but we can all cite players who showed potential and had a lot of moments that were tantalizing early on, and then it just all kind of clicked at a certain point in their career. Coen Carr is a guy who seems to fit that category.
Yeah, I'm certainly confident that he's going to be much better than last year, which was a very good year. I guess the question is, can he get to greatness? And I think it's there if he can unlock it. All right, so moving on to maybe the most important player in some respects for the team is Jeremy Fears. Although he was back last season for the entire year, he's still coming off the injury from the shooting incident back in Christmas of 23, and where he had to have surgery on his thigh to have a foot removed. And from an athletic standpoint, he seemed pretty good, although by all indications, he's back now. And there's a certain explosiveness that he sort of lacked a little bit last year is maybe back. So we'll certainly have to see how that works out. He averaged 7.2 points a game, 5.4 assists a game, with just 2 turnovers a game. So fantastic assist turnover ratio. He was 40, 34, and 73 from shooting. He's great defensively. He is obviously the emotional leader of the team. And, we talked about the cohesion of the team last year. And I think it's large part due to him. He was certainly instrumental in recruiting some players or convinced to become. He's obviously not the most important when it comes to recruiting. But I think the mentality of the team, the way they played, is largely dependent on sort of your most vocal leader. And for a redshirt freshman last year, he certainly was that. We expect him to be the same. It's sort of his DNA. He never stops talking in the court. And then I do think that the reason they were sort of successful as a unit largely was predicated on him because you have kind of the similar pieces the year before and just wasn't that way. And so I give him a lot of credit here because I do think he's the most important part there. And I think Robbie Hummel sort of mentioned that the way the team played together was unusual in the sense that there was, no one seemed to be upset about it or anything like that. So I do think that Jeremy is going to be a key to the game. He'll be a key. And so, yep. So what do you think, Rod?
I think that I'm expecting a big year from Jeremy Fears. And I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of consternation from some MSU fans about his shot. And this came out of, Midnight Madness and Moneyball that, it doesn't look improved. And I don't know what percentage he's going to shoot, but I also know that it's not first, it's not second, it's not third, it's not fourth, it's probably not fifth of the things I think matter most with regard to him. Yes, he's got to make some shots. Yes, if he shoots better, it will be helpful to Michigan State. It's just not near the top of things that I worry about. He is, and I said this several times last year. If you think it was an accident that Michigan State all of a sudden had a year that's more akin to what we expect from this program than what we'd seen over the previous 3 or 4 seasons, if you think that's just an accident or a coincidence that they made a change at the point guard position and that happened, and made a change to this guy specifically, I don't know what you're watching. And that doesn't mean that Jeremy Fears was a superstar, but that's not the point. You have to, I say this all the time, a great point guard, in my opinion, is a force multiplier, meaning a great point guard who truly makes those around him better, that lifts all tides, or lifts all boats, rather.
There you go.
It's the tide that lifts all boats.
Right.
It's going to make your team much, much better than just even the raw numbers that player puts up would suggest. And I submit the starting point guard last year, he's not the only thing, but had a lot to do with why that team was so much better. That's the kind of player Jeremy Fears is. Now, does he have to get better in certain areas? Absolutely. You want to talk about the jumper? Fine. To me, the bigger deal is he needs to be a better finisher at the rim. What gives me hope there, besides the fact that he's had another really a full offseason under his belt, which he didn't have last year, is that he's regained, according to Izzo, 5 inches of vertical. That's a big deal.
Do you even have 5 inches of vertical, period?
What's that?
I don't know that I do. Do you have 5 inches of vertical just yourself? I don't know if I do anymore.
Maybe barely. I'm in these days at my age, I'm in the Bill Laimbeer athleticism realm. But yeah, I mean, that's a huge deal because I thought Jeremy was certainly athletic last year. But now we're talking about he's gotten back to another level. That's going to help him finishing. And I maintain, in terms of his own offense, that's a bigger deal than three-pointers. That doesn't mean three-pointers don't matter, but this is the thing. You can't have reasonable discussions with people oftentimes on things like this. Because I could say one thing matters a lot more than the other, and that becomes, you think it doesn't matter at all. No. Yeah, if Jeremy Fears goes out and shoots 18% from 3 on higher volume than last year, yeah, that'll be a problem. I don't think that's going to happen. But it's a much bigger deal either way that he is finishing at the rim at a higher level, because what he did show last year is he has a very, very good ability to get to the basket. He just has to cash in more of those, right?
Yep.
I think as a playmaker, he's high level, and is going to make, Izzo has said it. He said the next step for him was, can he make others better? And he's starting to do that. That's what Izzo said this offseason, recently, as a matter, within the last couple of weeks. So you've got that. Defensively, I thought there were times he was great last year.
Yep.
I think he was really good overall, but there were segments of games where you'd say that guy's winning this game with the way he's defending. Because if you defend that at that level at the point, that's a big deal. You make it harder on everything the other team's trying to do. I think the two most important positions defensively in the game by far, I don't even think it's close, would be the 1 and the 5. And it's not an accident because those are the guys that are most involved in defending pick and rolls.
Sure.
So having him at the head defensively, big deal. And then on top of all of that, Izzo's talked about it from the day you recruited him, that got commitment, that he reminds him of somebody like Mateen in terms of his leadership. Obviously, last year, you saw that kind of shining through, but he's in his first year. It's hard, and people say this. We've seen it with a guy like Draymond Green was a classic example, where he always had that personality, but it took until some upperclassmen moved along to create the space for him to really make it his team. I think we're probably going to see that this year with Jeremy. I think you're going to see him being even more vocal and leading by example, leading with his voice, all of those things. So I'm really bullish on Jeremy Fears. I love him. I love the way he plays. I think we will see some improvement on the shot, but again, I'm not worrying about it because there's all these other things that I've talked about that to me matter a lot more and mean that even if he's a 30% shooter from three, he could still be one of the best point guards in this league if he does all the other things well enough, and that I think he can and will do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that was a little disappointing at the end of the season, he would just struggle from like 5, 8 feet. That was where if he starts finishing those, it's the sky's the limit because he can get there. Like you said, he can get kind of anywhere he wants on the floor. And also the other thing about him is that in contrast to Hogard, who's there for a couple of years before, you never felt like he was taking off a play. You never felt like he was taking off a half. He was always 100% in the game, both physically and mentally. And you never questioned that. I mean, I can't remember every time where you're like, boy, he just didn't bring it. He may have been great, but you never questioned his effort or sort of his intensity.
Not at all. And it is with you bringing that up, that brings to mind one other element. I do think, and it's another way he reminds me of Mateen. There were a handful of moments where Jeremy emotionally was walking the line as a freshman. Like you could see him maybe starting to tilt to a point that, maybe he was going to lose focus if it went any further or get a T, those types of things. Mateen had those same battles. It reminds me a lot of that. I still remember that Mateen sophomore year, the first year they were really good. They won the Big Ten. I remember they were playing Illinois in a game at home, and it was a big game because Illinois was good that year. And Mateen made a big play, and he did a throat slashing motion, and he got teed, and Izzo went ballistic. I mean, I could still see it, the whole thing in my mind. There were some moments that were kind of getting into that area last year with Jeremy, but I expect that there's going to be continued development and growth from him. And it's the thing you mentioned. Yeah, the effort level, you never question. The energy, the intensity, you never question. So it's a matter of finding ways to hone that and turn that into 100% positive instead of a 75% positive and 25% negative.
Exactly.
And I expect we're going to see growth there this year from Jeremy in that regard. with a lot of assistance from Tom Izzo and his staff.
Well, let's talk about Jaxon Kohler next. Jackson's back for a senior year, 6'9" post player. Definitely had his best year last year, averaged almost 8 points a game. He had almost, well, he had 7.5 rebounds a game to lead the team and led the team in blocks. He shot 53, 37, 82. The 37 was I don't want to say surprise because we all kind of knew he had it in him, but the fact that it sort of emerged late in the season, not surprising. We see this a lot of times where someone, a player has got maybe I don't know if I should say they don't have the green light, but they don't show it much in the beginning of the season. And then by the end of the season, suddenly it's there. And it's like, where was this? Kenny Goins is a good example of that with his senior year where he didn't have it. And then of course he hits the biggest shot of his career and probably his life against Duke to make the Final Four. So Jaxon showed that he really is coming out for 3-point shooting was certainly Illinois. And that's the thing that people will look at and say, oh, that's, but I think, things we were talking about well before then was the fact that rebounding, he changed the dynamic of Michigan State from a rebounding perspective, both on the offensive and defensive side. We definitely saw him on the offensive side previous seasons, but last year where he really made his turn, I guess you'd say, is that he was solid defensively too, from a rebounding standpoint. And I mean, made the rebounding challenge kind of boring. We had to change the rules because it was kind of silly, but he used to always win.
Yeah. I thought he had a really nice season, and he's one of the few guys that can point to that Elite Eight game against Auburn as a big positive.
Right.
Like that was a strong performance. Not just the numbers that he put up. He had a double-double, I believe, but the team he was doing it against. Auburn, if you remember, had a loaded front court.
Yeah.
And this is the knock on Jaxon, I think, has been that at times when he's faced with guys that are bigger than he is, which happens a lot. He's not, I think they list him at 6'10". He's probably about 6'8", realistically. But when he's faced with guys that have a size edge on him, that's posed problems in the past. And so for him to do what he did against an opponent like that, I thought that was a really, really good sign and definitely something for him to build on going into this season. I think, you talked about effort and energy and never doubting and intensity and never doubting that with Jeremy Fierce. Well, Jaxon Kohler.
There's another example, yeah.
Or so. I mean, that's a guy, you see him and he was born to be a Michigan State player. He's, sometimes Izzo will talk about needing to coach guys to actually show emotion. He's never had that problem with Jaxon Kohler. I give him a ton of credit. Man, there was a point in Jackson's career where you could have seen him maybe going kind of the route that Gehrig Normand did.
For sure. Yeah.
Where you just say, well, maybe the physical tools just aren't there the way we thought they would be at this level. And he's having injury problems and he can't get on track. Maybe he'd be better off transferring down a level and playing a bigger role in another place. But last year was so big for him, being healthy and just making himself into a consistent factor. You just look across the board and it's improvement, 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 improvement. Pretty much every area. I was having this discussion with somebody the other day. I remember a point, and it was as recently as last season, the beginning of last season, where my big worry about Jaxon Kohler was, man, I just don't know if he can guard fours well enough to play that position defensively. I don't worry about that anymore. I'm not saying he's Antonio Smith, but Jaxon Kohler got to a point last year by virtue of work. I have to assume a ton of film study, but also continuing every year to make physical improvements. So he got himself in a better condition. He got himself into better shape, and that likely added some element of being able to move well enough laterally to be able to handle it at the four. He basically got, you remember when Joey Hauser finally made that progression? He got there a year earlier.
Yeah, that was a senior year for Joey. Yeah.
2 years earlier, because Joey had a redshirt year. You talked about the rebounding. He'd always had a knack for offensive rebounding, but the defensive rebounding was not at the same level. Well, last year it was. Big improvement in that area. I think everybody is impressed, and you see it with broadcasters, especially people who don't do Michigan State a lot. When they first see him make a post move, like, oh my God, look at that footwork. And it is really impressive. But we all know, and this goes back to the size thing, he had real major problems finishing
Yeah.
at the collegiate level. I think he's not as good as he could be or needs to be, but he definitely got better last year finishing those plays, right? And then you mentioned the three-point shooting, something it was talked about. You could see it Moneyball. There was evidence of it coming, but you just weren't seeing it a lot in games. And then all of a sudden, maybe the midway point or so of last season, the switch flipped, and 37%. And that was coming on decent volume once he started taking them. Like, the season total of 3 attempts doesn't look like a ton. But when you look at those games in isolation, once he actually started taking them, pretty decent. Improvement there. So there's nothing that he didn't improve on. And in some cases, substantially. So I'm expecting another big year out of Jaxon. I think we're going to see the 3-point volume increasing because he's got confidence in it now, and so does Izzo, I would presume. I think he's going to be better finishing inside, finishing off those plays, those shot opportunities he gets because of a result of his exceptional footwork. And he may even be able to be a better rebounder. And one thing that's really interesting to me, we're going to talk about Cam Ward in a bit, MSU's freshman power forward, but I've seen Izzo talk about it, and I've seen Jaxon talk about it, how he's benefiting from competing every day against a guy that works just as hard as he does.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing what results that might yield. So yeah, there's no reason to not be bullish about the kind of year that Jaxon Kohler is ready to have, because I think he's ready to finally put everything together at a higher level still than he did last year.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of his defensive rebounding, the improvement comes from his just improvement in strength, is my guess. I think offensive rebounding is a little different skill.
Strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
Because he's got more energy in a sustained way. And you're right. He's able to withstand the contact that you inevitably get in the Big Ten from a bunch of big bodies crashing around when there's a loose ball, which is what a rebound is. And I think you're right. I think that definitely helped him.
All right, so let's move on to the next player who is, I think, I'm fairly maligned at sometimes by the Spartan fan base. That's Carson Cooper. He had a very good year. Yeah, well,
there's no better litmus test on this team in terms of what you're watching or you don't than discussion around Carson Cooper.
Carson averaged 5 points a game, 5.2 rebounds a game, played 17 minutes. He ended up shooting 74% from the line, 60% from the floor, never attempted a 3-point. I still don't think he's attempted a 3 yet, although there's that's going to change, I think, this year. We'll see.
Yeah.
And I think, the key we talked about with him, of course, is his defense. And he got really good. And this is maybe more a reflection of the fact that Jeremy Fears is the point guard with the rim dives. I mean, I think it's under your experience too, but he was very good with that on the pick and roll with Jeremy. And Coop is, I think, they're able to show that athleticism that we sort of anticipated. I mean, he forced himself out of a redshirt his freshman year. He was so important and critical to the team. And I think we saw a little bit more of that last year, especially. Of course, what people oftentimes focus on is like, oh, if you're 5, you got to be able to have a post game and score a lot of points that way. And you didn't show much of that last year. You had a jump hook he sort of developed later in the season. You saw that occasionally, but you didn't see a whole lot of other post work like you'd see from Jaxon Kohler. And I think people would focus on that if we're missing all the other aspects of the game. And this is, somewhat of a reflection of, just the statistical sort of way of looking at players. Well, from a statistical standpoint, from your shooting or from scoring, there wasn't a whole lot there. Even rebounding was good at 5, and sometimes he'd lead the team in rebounding, but he wasn't like pulling down 10 rebounds a game. And so, and as you mentioned before, he wasn't even averaging a block a game. And so, you could say, well, how could he be a good defensive player if he's a 5 and he doesn't get any blocks?
He is, I said this earlier, I'm going to reiterate it. In my opinion, look, you can Nate Biddle with the shot blocks, all that's great. You know what Nate Biddle doesn't do nearly as well as Carson Cooper? He doesn't guard out on the floor. And in an environment where everybody runs a ton of pick and roll with the 5-man as the screener, if you don't have a 5 that can guard extended out on the floor and can guard guards, you are then forced to take certain approaches, which we talk about a lot, right?
Mhm.
Guys stacking ball screen coverage, drop coverage. That's fine. That can, there are teams that would do that anyway because coaches believe, well, I'm going to play percentages on the jumper. I'm going to give that guard the jumper. I do not think, and clearly Tom Izzo does not think that's the best way to go because what it comes down to is you're kind of wishing and hoping. You are. I
Yeah,
mean,
right. Yeah. I
that's
hope he
fine.
misses.
You can bring a statistical analysis to it, say, "Look, I'll take my chances with that guard taking that jumper, especially if it's inside the arc and it's a two-pointer, because I know he's only going to hit a certain percentage, and I think I'm going to win that gamble in the long run." But that is wishing. That's putting that's putting the onus on success or failure on the opponent, which can be, I'm not going to say it's not entirely an unsound approach, but I think you're better off if you are able to be more proactive in what you do. And Michigan State can be as proactive as they need to be when they have a guy like Carson Cooper who can get out in ball screen coverage and make the switch and guard a guard for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Um, that's a huge deal. That is a huge, huge deal. And it's one of the aspects of the game that I think even with broadcasters, I think there's generally a poor job being done in terms of valuing what kind of weapon that is. And so what that leads to is a lot of casual fans don't even understand what they're watching. So they think, well, a 5-man is only valuable defensively if he can protect the rim. No, 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 no. Not in the modern game, especially. 40 years ago, yeah, not now. And that's where I think Carson Cooper's, if he doesn't do anything else and he just does that at the level that he does, he's a plus player.
Yeah.
That's how I view it. Now, we can talk about all these other things. He improved as a rebounder. That's another guy. I think as clearly as with Jaxon Kohler, increased strength has helped him.
Yeah.
And he's again like Jackson, he's become a presence at both ends on the glass. You know, he's become a good offensive rebounder. I think he's always been a pretty good defensive rebounder. And with improved strength, he's able to secure a lot more of those balls. I mean, you might say, well, 5.2 rebounds a game isn't a huge number. He did that in 17 minutes. So if he's playing 25, you know,
Yeah.
that
Right.
number's probably knocking on the door of 7 a game, where you'd be more impressed, right?
Mhm.
So I think we're gonna see those kind of minutes from him this year. So I expect those rebounding totals to go up. And then we come to the offensive end. I think last year the big step was exactly what you noted. His ability to, and this is the thing. I talked about him defensively against pick and rolls. He's also a weapon offensively because he sets very good screens and he's got a knack in timing with Jeremy Fears and with the other guards too, but especially with Jeremy on the rim dives off of pick and roll. And it's funny how, all of a sudden you don't see big men struggling to corral those passes and finish
Right.
those
Suddenly
plays
his hands are better.
like they were before. Wonder why that is. And I'm not saying Carson's got nothing to do with it, but did Carson get a hand transplant? I don't think so. That's another way where your point guard matters.
Yeah.
Uh, so he's got that element, right? Now we have reason to believe from what we've seen and what we've been told that there's been real progress in other ways offensively. I think the bigger deal is actually that Izzo has said that that mid lane jump hook has really started to come on. That alone would be a big boost. If Michigan State can know, hey, we can dump it into Carson 2 or 3 times a game and he could convert that play for us. That's a big plus. And then obviously there's everybody's favorite, the 3-point shooting. And we've seen footage from practice with Carson draining a three in as the trail man that was as smooth as anything you ever saw from Joey Hauser or AJ Granger or anybody out, Goran Suton. It looked like those guys. Not just even the fact that he made it, but the way it looked, the smoothness, the release, how fast he got it off, all of that looked really good. He's going to take threes this year. I don't know what that volume's going to look like, but if teams are leaving him open, he's going to take some. And if he's shooting it well, I saw Jim Comparoni said, based on what he had seen from Moneyball and I think some limited practice viewing, he said Cooper was shooting it better than Kohler. I don't know whether that means Jaxon was off or Carson's been just that good, probably somewhere in between. But that's encouraging. So I'm expecting a really good year from Carson Cooper. I'm not saying he's going out averaging 15 and 10 and he's shooting 45% from three. Let's not get crazy. But I think the things that I know are going to be there are so important that alone ensures he's going to have a good year as a contributor. But then you start to factor in these other areas where he's clearly making improvement. I think he's going to be really impactful for them.
All right, so now we'll move off the players who played last year, and we're getting to returning players who didn't really see the floor much. Kur Teng played, I think, one game. He played where he had significant minutes was against Iowa, where Jaden came out for a little bit. But so 6'3" sophomore guard, he was the one we were questioning whether it'd be him or it'd be Jase who'd get the minutes. Obviously, ended up being Jase. He was reportedly a fantastic shooter in high school. He's one of the best in the country. And we'll have to see what he's going to be. I think, the questions are going to be the same as you'd expect for anyone coming in you haven't seen play for a while. Can he rebound? Can he defend? And then secondarily, can he shoot?
Yeah, and a very important player, no matter which role he's in. And then it seems to be very much a close competition between he and Tre Fort for the starting job on one wing, the wing opposite Carr, the two, what people call the two. Kur Teng has real ability. He kind of became the forgotten man last year because of MSU depth. But I'm telling you, 9 years out of 10, he would have been an MSU rotation. Yeah. It was a weird year in that way. And I'm very glad and very thankful that he stuck it out because his situation is exactly what you worry about in the modern era, which is a guy who has talent, for whatever reason, doesn't get the opportunity to play much, and then decides, well, you know what? Screw this. I'm out of here.
Right,
And
exactly.
he goes and leaves somewhere else, and somebody else gets the benefit of it. We see it happen on a lot of occasions. Kur didn't do that. He stuck it out, and now he's going to be a big part of this team. No matter what, I'd be shocked if we're not seeing him at least 18, 20 minutes a game. And I think it could be more. We know about the shooting. That was his reputation. We saw evidence of it on the Spanish trip last summer. It is, I don't even count, I think he shot like 22% on the year. Throw it out. It doesn't matter because it's in garbage time. You can't, that stuff doesn't mean anything. Izzo has consistently talked about him this offseason as one of the guys that's right there to be his best shooter. Yeah. And I think he's probably mentioned him more consistently than anybody else. Another thing that was interesting about a week or so ago, I can't remember who did the interview, but somebody asked Nick Sanders if he had one word in mind about this year's Michigan State team that people don't realize, and he actually used two words, Kur Teng.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And it's funny. Earlier in the summer, there was a lot of buzz about Tre Fort, and I think deservedly so. But as the offseason went along, you started to hear more and more about Kur Teng. And I think the thing that you have to assume, all else being equal, that gives Kur Teng maybe a little bit of a leg up, especially early, is he has more grounding in MSU system defensively than a newcomer. And, he had a good reputation as a defender coming out of high school. As a recruit, people thought he'd be a good defensive player. And then, you heard stuff last year that, as sometimes happens, guys are struggling at times making the transition. But Izzo's been complimentary. I'm not expecting Kur Teng's going to come in and be Jaden Akins, but it sounds like they're pretty confident he's at least functional and maybe better than that. And if he is, defensively, with what he can do as a shooter, he's going to play a lot. It's that simple. And they need him to play. You mentioned rebounding too. I saw that in this on the Spanish trip, and I saw that at times when he did play. He is one of those guys, and you see this sometimes, guys on the perimeter who just have a knack for getting to loose balls, to rebounds, long rebounds. And that's an area that I don't think Michigan State, they were better last year, but I think over the course of the last several years, they haven't been as good in.
Yeah.
In terms of perimeter guys being able to just instinctually move on a loose ball before anybody else and get there and secure it. Kur Teng seems to me like he's that kind of guy. He just seems to have a sense for it, and I don't think it's something that can be taught. I think it's just kind of innate, and I think he's got it. So I'm looking for him to make an impact in that area as well. But very bullish on him. I think he's going to have a good year, and it's going to surprise people. Not maybe so much Michigan State fans, although some of them will be too, but more the outside world, because he just kind of slipped into the abyss. Everybody forgot about him.
Yeah, it would be interesting too with him in the. I think as far from a starting standpoint, that's going to be the battle, sort of who starts at that position.
Yeah.
Whether it's him or Tre Fort. And you can almost imagine if it's a tie that Izzo might just give it to Kur Teng and just kind of see what he does with it. Or, maybe he'll go Tre Fort. I guess I could see go either way. But you could definitely see a scenario where he starts and becomes comfortable and then just remains a starter, or, vice versa with Tre Fort. I mean, it's possible, right? And so it'll be very interesting to see how the season starts and then how that guy, whoever it is, kind of hangs on to that starting role or not.
Well, you see it, and you saw it last year, and you usually see it. It can take a little bit of time when you've got new players for guys to settle into roles. And really, Kur is a new player in terms of being a real rotation guy, right? Yeah. But he does have that leg up, having had a year in the system. And yeah, I think it'll be whatever happens in, these exhibition games that are coming up, or when the lights go on for real. It's early, and there will likely be some shifting in terms of how those minutes get allocated, how the roles are allocated until they settle in. So I think if you'd asked me this question in June, based on what I was hearing, I would have said, yeah, that's Tre Fort's role. And Kur's going to play a lot, but it's going to be probably coming off the bench. Now, if I had to pick, gun to my head right now, I would probably say I'd expect Kur Teng to start. Whether it stays that way, yeah, anybody's guess. As I say, it'll take some time for that to settle. Because guys can improve too, right? But
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully.
But yeah, I think he's going to play a lot regardless. I expect that.
Moving on to play we mentioned before is Jesse McCulloch. We had him on the show as well. I encourage you to go back and watch the interview. Super nice guy, really great, 100% like positive person. Like these are the people you kind of want to surround yourself with in life in general that just have a positive outlook on things. And I
Well,
know I talked to his,
didn't one of the coaches tell us that he was, maybe it was Saudi Washington,
I think it was Saudi. Yeah, I think
that
he did.
said
And
just
yeah,
a guy that you see him every day and he's the same, never has a bad day. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You never want to surround yourself with people who are always having a bad day. We all know these
Right.
people. they're kind of dragging life, and you want to be the opposite. And I actually talked to a nurse who ran to him on campus, and said just, the sweetest guy, she's what she said. So he's 6'10", redshirt freshman. He obviously redshirt last year, but as you mentioned earlier, he was so good that coaches considered pulling off the redshirt and just throwing him in. So he's got 4 years left to play. He was known as a shooter, a skilled four, but someone definitely who could play the five. So I think probably expect to see him probably play more five, just because of the role in this team behind Cooper. But I guess you could envision a time scenario where maybe he's out there with Cooper. I don't know what happened. It's hard to imagine that happening, but I guess, the way things might land, sometimes you might see that. So, but it sounds like he certainly could play the four if needed.
Absolutely. He could play both, but I think on this team, you look at the roster, he's the only legit big-sized big that they've got reserve. So he almost has to play. And I think Carson's role, as I said, I would expect he probably goes up to about 25 minutes a night this year. That still leaves 15 minutes. And so you got to cover those. And really, Jesse's the only option, unless you're going to go small ball, which would be Jaxon at the 5, which I don't love, or somebody like Cam Ward, which, remains to be seen, but I don't think that's the ideal option either. So, yeah, I think because of the roster as much as anything else, Jesse's probably going to play more 5 this year. But I'm really enthused to see this guy play, just based on everything we've heard. We've talked about already that the coaches were so impressed with him during his redshirt year. And it's something that didn't get talked about a lot, and it applies to Kur Teng as well. Uh, if you paid attention, you saw the coaching staff give a lot of credit for last year's success to their scout team. And I'd heard people say that was the best scout team they'd had in forever. And that part of that was, attitude, the things you were just talking about with Jesse McCulloch, right? But it was also just the way that they played, that these guys could really simulate. They were good enough to simulate what the rotation regulars were going to see from opponents. That's a big deal. And Jesse McCulloch was a big part of that. There's something with him that I noticed when I watched him play AAU, and it apparently has come right through to Michigan State. That's a big deal. And you don't always get it. It's very important for Michigan State post players, especially 5-men, to communicate defensively, because they are on the back line. So they're the guys that are best positioned to see everything that's happening, to call out screens,
Right.
just to diagnose what's going on, and by verbally communicating, help their teammates. The best MSU defenses have had guys like that. I saw Jesse McCulloch do that for Spice Indy Heat in an AAU game. I saw him talking defensively.
Which is
I
not
couldn't
unusual. That's
I couldn't
unusual, right?
believe it. I really couldn't believe it, because you don't see that. You don't see that as much from high school players in general. You really don't see it in AAU, but I saw it from him, and I remember mentioning it, pretty sure, on this podcast at the time. And this was, I think it was after he'd committed, but it was still, or obviously he was playing AAU after his junior year, so it was early. That struck me, and I noted that, like, wow, that guy's actually talking defensively. Well, we've heard that about him at Michigan State, that he has a voice and he uses it defensively. That's a big, big deal. That is going to help him, and that is going to help Michigan State overall, if he is that level of communicator. Now, we also need to know he's actually seeing the right things. Be taught it, but by all accounts, he's got a pretty good grasp of what the state wants and needs to do. Offensively, I've seen him in AAU viewings show some post game. They're not talking about it a ton, but I would expect that he can give them a little something there. They have talked about his shooting ability, which was something that was definitely discussed as a positive with him, but the sense I had as a recruit, that is, but the sense I had was that was more, yeah, his shot looks good and he shows potential. It wasn't like he was shooting 45% from three as a high school senior. So
Yeah.
my thought was, well, there's got to be some development still going on there before that's really a weapon. But it sounds like they feel pretty confident in it. When Izzo's talking about his ability to stretch a defense, okay, that he's showing that. So I'm just as intrigued by him as any player on the roster because I think the things that I've heard about him and some of the things I've seen from him, albeit a while back, it paints a picture that you think, boy, this guy could be really good. I don't expect him to be a star this year, but I expect him to be a key member of this team and a guy that's contributing a lot to winning games. That much I do expect. And I think we're going to be at the end of the season saying, boy, you could see all the signs. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we're viewing him, and I'm not saying he's gonna necessarily have the full career this guy had, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're kinda calling back to, "Yeah, you remember how we felt about Xavier Tillman or Draymond Green at the end of their freshman years?" It kinda feel except I think this guy's gonna play more than those guys did.
Sure. Yeah.
Getting the benefit of the red shirt, obviously, has helped,
Mhm.
but I would not be surprised if we're having those kinda conversations.
Yeah, and we'd be remiss, obviously, not to just mention that he did injure I think it was his foot, and so he's in a boot for a
That's
while
true. Part of
this
this
summer.
offseason.
So he definitely missed some time, but he was even when I watched him in Moneyball, and that was what, July, I suppose.
Yeah.
He was moving around fine, just shooting around, was kind of goofing around between games. The boot was off at that point. So, and there's every indication, at least in practice, that he's fine.
All the positive stuff I've mentioned about, things you're hearing, um, has been lately,
Yeah, right.
recently.
Since yeah,
So, obviously, post him coming back from that, I don't think that's slowing him down. That's my impression.
right. All right, so then let's start talking about the new players brought to you by Nudge Printing. Friends, if you need some Michigan State gear, I know I talk about it every show, but I'm wearing right now. This is a super comfortable shirt. They're high quality garments that have screen printing on it. And it's whether you get our logo, which you can get at the friends and friends of the show at the nudgeprinting.com. But go to Nudge Printing, you can get any sort of vintage or current logo. They have all the different sports. So if you want to get some football stuff, some hockey, golf, whatever it might be, you can find it at Nudge Printing. Whether you want a quarter zip, a jacket, even a sticker for your computer or the big for your wall, you can get all that at Nudge Printing. Super great quality, great pricing, great shipping. If you have also a function with your business or a nonprofit, they can also do that as well. They can get all that, and they take care of all the money issues. So they can just you can just contact them. They'll come up with a design. They can print everything out. They'll ship it to everybody. They'll collect all the money. So you don't have to do anything except sort of just send an email to all the people who might be interested in ordering whatever it is. We did it for my son's robotics team in high school, and that was like super simple. It was very, very good. But go on to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. 20% off if you type Final Four at checkout. Check out their huge selection. They also have other schools as well, although we focus mainly on Michigan State. But again, you're not going to be disappointed in any sort of thing you get. The only real problem is sometimes it lasts too long. And so then you might just accumulate too much Nudge Printing stuff, but that's probably a good problem to have. You can buy stuff as gifts. But as we have other people who, listeners of the show who've bought stuff at Nudge as a gift, make sure you get one for yourself as well. Otherwise, you just end up keeping the gift. And that's what someone did. So don't be that kind of person, but make sure you get enough stuff. So go ahead again, nudgeprinting.com. All right, so let's begin with Cam Ward, one of the freshmen coming in, 6'8", out of Maryland. He was the all-time leading scorer in Maryland high school basketball history, who won back-to-back state titles. So he's a winner. And we had him on the show as well. And right as soon as we got off, we're like, okay, this kid's got a ton of personality. He's going to be beloved by everybody. And we talked, I think, Borovich right before the season. He's like, yeah, within like meeting him one time, my kids, he's their favorite player. So he's a guy who's going to be not only really well loved as far as for who he is as a person, and which is, sort of part of it, but I think also by the fact that player, he has skills both inside and outside, but certainly more his inside, his hustle. And as you mentioned, he's going up against Carson or not Carson, but Jaxon, and making him work.
Yeah. He's, it's kind of an interesting guy in terms of the sum total of parts. He's obviously got a ton of charisma. We saw that when we interviewed him. He's MSU has almost uniformly has nice guys in the program when you talk to them, you and
Right.
I,
Yeah.
at least I think even when there's fan interactivity, like at Moneyball or whatever. But there are some guys who shine through and you can see it. Like you saw it from Draymond Green as a freshman. They're like, oh, that guy is one of the best interviews that you're going to find. And that was apparent as a college freshman. And you see what he's become. Sometimes for better or for worse, but mostly for better. Cam Ward has that, but it's the only thing I don't know. The sense I have is that he's definitely a future leader of this program. I don't think we've seen signs yet, and it's probably the kind of thing that will show up in a game. Is if he's got that ass kicker in him, because you need that too. He's definitely a vocal guy. He's a he's not afraid to hear his own voice. That seems obvious. But there's the Draymond Green, Antonio Smith kind of guy, and then there's the Tum Tum Nairn kind of guy. And Tum Tum was a leader, and he wasn't a guy who was throwing people in the lockers when they needed it.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Cam is that yet. I have a feeling he might have that in him. We'll see. But regardless, we've heard from Izzo and from Jaxon Kohler that Cam Ward is playing with a lot of toughness. Izzo doesn't throw around those compliments about freshmen, but you can see it, the things he said recently. So you know what's going on in fall practice. That Cam Ward is bringing all the things in terms of energy and toughness and attitude and intensity that are staples of this program. And that's a big part of the reason why they recruited him. It's a big part of the reason why, and I won't bother naming any names, but at an early stage of that recruiting class, there were some other guys at that spot that MSU was recruiting harder. They hadn't even offered Cam yet. And that changed. And I think the reason it changed is they saw the things in Cam Ward that they wanted to see and that are part and parcel of a Michigan State basketball player. And they didn't see those things to the same degree in some other guys. And that's why it went down the way it did, I believe. But, look, he's going to play. He's going to play. I don't know how large the role is going to be. I don't think it's going to be cameo stuff. I think it's definitely going to be double-digit minutes regardless. I just don't know how big it could get. I think, though, we're talking a lot about toughness, and so we're talking about the grit stuff, right?
Yeah.
Rebounding, defense, checks those boxes. But I saw plenty of evidence from him as a high school player that he's got real offensive game. He can shoot the three. He can handle the ball. He can pass it. He could do all of those things offensively that should make him an effective player. I don't know yet how much of that shows up this year. That's always a question mark with freshmen. Until you see it, you don't know for sure. But suffice it to say, I think it's there. And I think he's going to be a hell of a player. And I think he's going to be a guy who helps this year. My only question is to what degree? Is it some or is it a lot? I don't know.
Yeah, he's going to be very exciting and fun to watch too. So then moving on to a player we mentioned earlier, is Tre Fort, 6'4" senior transfer. This is his fifth team. He's been around, so to speak, in the transfer portal. He has also he's a great athlete. We saw that at Moneyball this summer, and very good shooter too as well. And most recent with Samford. You may remember that he played last year at Breslin, and I think he went over 5. And when we had him on the show, he definitely wants to wash away those memories of not playing well at the Breslin. And I think, we had expected him to, for sure, like you said, to be the starter. But maybe now it's going to be Kur Teng, just because he's going to take some time to figure out how Michigan State plays defense, because they played a wildly different defense at Samford. And he's played, this would be his 5th system of playing defense. And even we would talk to him, I think, just even about this fast break, he's like, it's different at Michigan State because it's more structured than it was anywhere else he's played. Not that they didn't run and, shoot fast quickly at Samford, but everything's just different at Michigan State, just as far as its structure.
Yeah, I think, look, people were very excited when he first got to campus because you knew he was a good athlete, but I didn't even appreciate until I started seeing footage. They ran some practice footage where they were in transition and Tre Fort got up like you would have sworn it was Coen Carr. I don't think it's an exaggeration. If he was to be the starter, Michigan State might have the most athletic wing combination in the country. I'd be hard-pressed off the top of my head to think of a better candidate for
Sure,
it.
yeah.
He is that level of athlete. He's not quite Coen Carr because nobody is, but boy, he's that next level. And he's put together. He's strong physically. And what's interesting about him is he combines that with good ball skills. He can absolutely shoot the ball. He shot it well at Samford. They say he shot it very well in practice. The thing that I remember Borovich told us that had surprised him a little bit was how good he was with the ball in his hands. So he's got some playmaking and some ball handling ability, and that's really good because that means you can put him in pick and roll situations, do some damage there. Even in Izzo's recent commentary, he has said the offensive end is there. There's no question. The question mark is going to be defense. It's as simple as that. And it's hard. We did talk about, and I think we talked about with him when we interviewed him,
we did.
how big a difference it's going to be coming from buckyball where you're pressing and all that to Michigan State, where very different things are asked of you. And he's had, again, 5 programs in 5 years, so he's never had that consistency. I think you have to stay realistic, and I'm sure Michigan State is. You're unlikely to turn a guy into a stopper in 1 year. That's not going to happen. Right. Or forget 1 year, in a few months. The hope is that you get him to be functional. And Michigan State's done that with a lot of guys who had issues. And frankly, a lot of guys who had issues who did not have the physical tools that Tre Fort has. Because Tre Fort's got all the physical tools to be a good defensive player. He's very athletic and he's very strong. That's your baseline, right? Yep. Now it's about the understanding, the mental part of it, and how quickly you react, how well you understand your concepts, and your responsibilities and your role, where your effort and focus level is, all those things. And you just don't know how long that's going to take. The hope, again, is that they get him to be functional. And if he is functional, then I think he's going to be a big, big factor for Michigan State. Because offensively, I've heard nothing that suggests to me he's not going to come in and be immediately one of their best scorers.
Yeah.
And that he can also make plays for others helps too. And he seems like a guy who can impact the game at every level. So he's obviously a weapon in transition, but he shoots the 3 well and he handles the ball well. So he could be a good half court player. It's all there offensively. The questions are on defense. I think regardless, he's going to play a lot because they kind of have to. But the hope is that you get him to that point that he's at least not a liability.
Yeah, exactly.
If that happens, look out.
Well, then we'll round out the Michigan State very small high school recruiting class with Jordan Scott, 6'7" freshman from across the Potomac from his counterpart, Cam Ward. He's from Virginia, where he is also, I think, did he win the state title last year as well? I think he did.
What's that?
I think he won the state title in Virginia, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
Won it twice.
Yeah, so he's also 2-time state champion for Virginia. So his mom, I think, works for ESPN as well. So he's got a lot of, and I think she was his coach most of the time, if I recall from our conversation. And nice kid, great guy. And I think our impression, he's listed as 6'7", but I think there was some question whether he still had a couple inches left. I'm not sure if he's continued to grow at this point, but
well, both he and Cam Ward, the word is showed up taller than they had.
All right, well there you go.
So he's sick. I'm listing him at 6'7". He had been listed at 6'6" when he committed. I think that the sense I have is that Jordan Scott has surprised some people in terms of the strength gains that he's been able to make. Because if you remember, I think early on the sense was, well, I don't think there was necessarily talk that he would redshirt, but that, well, it might take him a year to be ready to compete at the high major level. But now it seems pretty clear to me they're expecting him to be part of the rotation. Izzo talks about him with Kur Teng and Tre Fort as his best shooter. He's in that 3-man category. We knew
exactly
that coming out. That was a strength of his. But if he's in the rotation, that helps on a couple levels. The perimeter shot making is obvious. If the shooting translates the way it seems to be, that's a big positive. But the other thing is that length. I mean, even if you figure, well, freshman, he's going to have to make an adjustment defensively, but 6'7" and long plays on the perimeter. You can cover up some things just with those physical tools. And so another guy, I keep saying about a lot of these guys, but I'm really excited to see him, just to see how far he's progressed. The whole key with him, I don't think there's ever been a question about his ball skills. Like, this is a guy who's very talented as a shot maker, reasonably good ball handler for a guy his size, passer, all of that. That's all there. It's just how quickly does he adjust to the requirements in those grit areas, rebounding. 6'7" as a wing, you should be a good rebounder. Will he be right away? I don't know. We'll see. And defense, obviously. Those are the things that are gonna determine it. But I think he's another guy that's got a very, very bright future. Like, to have his combination of physical tools and shooting ability, that's the kind of stuff and that makes for really good players. And you don't know. Not every guy who has that combination, you think about somebody like Gabe Brown had similar kind of combination and also similar issues in terms of needing to gain strength. And Gabe became a good player at Michigan State, but he never broke through to that next level. So and then, on the other side of it, you got Steve Smith. So,
we'll keep our fingers crossed for the Steve Smith outcome here.
That's right.
So moving on to another transfer, Divine Ugochukwu, 6'3" sophomore transfer from University of Miami. High-level athlete as well. He'll be seen as a backup point guard. People were sort of excited about him coming. They obviously they point out, as you look for statistics of anything sort, and the fact they point out that he shot just 20% from 3 as a freshman. But other than that, at least watching him at Moneyball and in the very brief scrimmage at Midnight Madness, looked really good. Like, I mean, his ability to get to the rack. And now I don't know how hard they're playing defense, but it certainly was the men's game. The men's scrimmage was a lot harder defense than it was in the women's scrimmage at Midnight Madness. But he looked pretty good to me. I mean, he looked much like he did in Moneyball. So I think he's going to be more than just a plain old backup, just playing a couple minutes. I think he's going to bring a lot to the team. And he is also a sophomore. So he's got a couple of years if he decides to stick around. And there's no reason to think he wouldn't. But I guess, those things are unknowable at this point.
That's right. I look, he shot. I looked it up when they signed him. Yes, he struggled. He was like 18% from three at Miami. But as a high school senior, I think he shot like 34%, something like that. It was in the 30s from three. And then you look at his shot, as you mentioned. You look at it on film, you look at it in person where you've seen him Moneyball and at Midnight Madness. I'm not worried. Now, that doesn't mean I think he's Sean Resper, but I don't think it's going to be some. We're not talking about freshman year Eric Snow. We're just not. I'm convinced of that. Like he's going to shoot it well enough. People are probably going to make him prove that he can hit them. That's reasonable. But I don't think you're going to have the guy guarding him camping under the rim. And the thing is, everything else should give you a lot of reason for optimism. Yeah, he played for a terrible team. Miami was awful last year. But that's a freshman playing significant minutes.
Yeah, he started what,
Starting
2/3 of the
times
season. Yeah.
on a high major team. That's experience that can do nothing but help him. We saw plenty of evidence in Miami footage. This is a guy who I think can make a defensive impact. He's the one newcomer. I guess I'm not worried about Cam Ward either, but among the perimeter guys, he's the one newcomer for MSU that I'm not worried about defensively. I don't know how good he's going to be immediately because, again, there's still an adjustment to what Tom Izzo demands of you, et cetera, et cetera. But he definitely has the physical tools, and he showed evidence of being a good defensive player and a disruptive guy multiple times. There were clips and multiple occasions at Miami where he was deflecting balls with his length that turned into fast breaks. Now, Michigan State doesn't, you're not playing the passing lanes much, but those kind of instincts can still play at MSU. And you look at him, he's got good size at 6'3" positionally. That helps. And again, he has a year of playing point guard at a high major program. So I think for the role that they needed to fill, I think he was a very good addition because you can see a floor that should at least tell you, okay, worst case scenario, we can get 10 decent minutes of holding down the fort out of him. But you can also see ceiling for much more. When you're talking about a guy his size, that position, and the athleticism, that alone tells you there's something there. And if the shot does come around at least a little bit, the way we think it will,
Yeah.
even better still.
Yeah, and finally, to round everything, so for newcomers is Denham Wojcik, 6'1" senior point guard. He transferred from Harvard. Obviously, last name Wojcik, for those who are familiar. He's Doug Wojcik's son. And we had him on the show. He seems like, and he's obviously the backup point guard, but someone who's started at Harvard. I think he started the whole season as a point guard. So there's every reason to think that he's going to be very competent. He looked, I would say, again, hits Moneyball, but he looked pretty good in Moneyball, at least handling the ball. He looked very, very comfortable and much better than a lot of the other players they have who show up in Moneyball sometimes from even D1 schools that are smaller schools. So I would just say that if he had to come in and play spot minutes, I would not be too concerned. Like if Nick Sanders comes in, I'd definitely be more concerned if he's playing significant minutes.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I think again, I just said it with Ugochukwu, and I'd say it about Denham Wojcik. For the role they brought him in for, which is basically insurance point guard / teaching tool. So if somebody's not doing the right things, you sit, Denham comes in, you learn how to do the right things. I could not have done much better. This is a guy with lots of starting experience at the D1 level. Now, that doesn't mean that I think he's Cassius Winston. He's not. But I'm not surprised to hear you say what you're saying because that's exactly what I would expect. What you're talking about is a guy who's probably a break in case of emergency option, right? Like one of those two guys gets hurt,
Exactly.
or there's extreme foul trouble, something weird happens. That's pretty good to have a guy like that. And having a guy like that as a point guard too, I might add, means your scout team is probably going to be pretty
Exactly.
damn
Yep.
good. So I thought it was a great addition. Again, I'm not being hyperbolic about this saying, yeah, he's going to be a huge difference maker on game day. But I think you look at the totality of it, and you say that's a smart addition. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of teams over the last couple of years we've been doing these previews, there are a number of additions or roster construction where you're left scratching your head a little bit like, I'm not quite sure why they did this or that. All the parts that Michigan State has added, I think, are ones that make sense, and they seem to be players who are pluses as far as coming in for those roles. They're not just the guy to fill. Like even we thought Zapala had a good year last year, but I wouldn't say that he was a plus. But I feel like most of these players are like plus additions, ones at least on paper, at least which your impression of coming in.
I disagree with that a little bit. I think
Well,
he was a plus in his
okay,
role.
I guess
Yeah.
I guess just coming in, he was not expected to be a plus plus addition. Yeah,
Oh, he
I
wasn't
guess that's what I mean.
expected to
Like,
be one.
these are
Absolutely.
obvious pluses, I think,
Yes.
for the role they expected.
Yeah, and honestly, when it comes to the roster composition, for as much bitching as people do about MSU's activity or lack thereof in the portal, I think and let's keep in mind, they also
Well,
added
right, we could
Caleb
talk
Glenn,
about
who we'd
him,
be
but
talking
yeah.
about a lot if he wasn't hurt. So we'll have him in this preview hopefully next year. But that would be another big piece, I assure you, that they unfortunately are not going to have. Uh, but I think the guys they added, yeah, they make a ton of sense. You look at what they needed, and I think they did a pretty good job of addressing it. The only thing I thought that they might have done that they didn't do, and I mentioned this earlier, is I wouldn't have minded seeing them add, a 6'10", 6'11", 7-foot guy, just as that emergency option. But I think there are a couple things going on there. I think one is they probably just didn't see the right guy out there, which fair enough. I can't argue with that. The other thing is I think they may have more confidence, not just in Jesse McCulloch, because I know they have confidence in him, but you have heard little rumblings about maybe Cam Ward being able to play a small ball five. And that might have factored in too. I'm guessing at that. I have not heard that definitively from anybody, but I'm thinking that might have been part of it. That it might have thought, you know what, worst comes to worst, we can play Cam there and feel like we'll
Yeah.
be okay. I don't know. I I I I don't want to see Jaxon Kohler at 5
No.
very much.
Emergency situations, certain
Because I think
matchups, right.
that's where he struggles defensively, is he just kind of gets overwhelmed by size. Uh, but if they've got somebody like Cam as another option, maybe that means you could still do that kind of thing, just better. But that would have been the only roster move that they didn't make that I thought they might have been able to make, and that's honestly going pretty deep in the bag.
Yeah.
To be
Because you may
getting
not,
to that,
that's
like,
one you may not use, right? So it's like how much effort you put towards it. Yeah.
right. That's it. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. It's like, well, you're talking about adding a fourth big man when you're really only expecting to play
Yeah,
3.
exactly. And you think, well, if it's like a foul situation, you could probably get by with Ward and Kohler or some combination.
Right.
And I mean, you could play
The
Carr
only
at the
time it
4 and put
becomes
Ward at the 5. He had, or
Yep.
there are ways you could match or survive just 5 minutes.
where it becomes a problem is if you had an injury.
Right.
That's the only time it becomes significant. And in an individual game scenario, you can get your way around it.
Well, and you could even argue if there was a significant injury, let's say Cooper gets injured for, let's say 5 weeks or something. Are you better off having a backup big guy, or are you better just trying to get by with the and maybe you can have enough offense to overwhelm the defensive deficiencies you have. I mean, it's hard to know that you'd be much better off.
I think that kind of thought process is probably what led to the decision, because they did look at some guys. I know that they went overseas. They looked at a couple guys. So it was not off the table, but the fact that they didn't do it, there's obviously a reason. I think sometimes fans think that it's just, oh, Izzo's being my favorite read in sarcasm, least favorite word related to Izzo is
Stubborn.
stubborn.
Yeah.
He's stubborn. No, he's convicted. There's a difference. Uh, and it's not that. I think they took a look. They didn't like what they saw. The only way they were going to add somebody is if it was somebody who had the ability to help now. And then again, when you're talking about, well, the ability of a guy to help now, when we're telling him, look, we're only going to use you much if there's a problem. That's not very compelling. They got very fortunate, I think, with
For
Zapala
sure.
last
Yeah.
year. That it turned out, oh, this guy can actually
Yeah.
play. Because I don't think that was the mindset initially to add him. And it was great that he was willing to do it. That doesn't come around every year. People think it's easy. It's not. But other than that, yeah, I'm with you. I think that they've added guys that at least on paper look like they should be able to address the holes that they needed filling.
And so now that we've gone through the previews of all the other Big Ten teams in Michigan State, I'll be honest with you, I am probably more excited about this team. I think this team has more potential. And yeah, last year went to the Elite Eight, won the Big Ten by 3 games. So it might seem crazy, but I honestly do think that this team is the makings of a team that's going to be better than last year's team. I mean, it may not be good enough to beat Purdue because Purdue may just be that much better than the teams were in the Big Ten last year. But I think it's not unreasonable to imagine this team is to have a really, really good year and maybe really, I mean, Final Four is not, I think, unreasonable, assuming some of these pieces play or come up to the expectations that I have. And there's room, especially like someone like Coen Carr, or maybe like Cam Ward or George Scott or Tre Fort, that you're going to, or Kur Teng even, that you get so much more than you had anticipated, that it could be a really, really tough team to take care of, because you might have a team that's not only deep, that's running and doing all those things like last year's team, but maybe more explosive offensively and is maybe not as good defensively, but almost as good. They could be a really tough team to take out.
It's an intriguing team. I can't sit here today and say that I expect them to be better than last year. But then again, I wasn't sitting here last year at this time saying I expect the team to win the Big Ten by 3 games and go to the Elite Eight. So, perspectives can change. I definitely, last year, by the time they got back into Big Ten play,
Yeah, the calendar flip.
I was convinced this is a team that can win the league.
Yeah.
That you could see.
Yeah.
So we'll see. They're playing incredibly difficult. We always say that, but this year is really something else. Incredibly difficult November and December. So we're going to get some good before the games even start. The exhibitions. We're going to get some good level tests early on. So we're going to have a sense of where they are by Thanksgiving for sure. We're going to have a pretty good idea. Okay, these are the things that look good. These are the areas that need improvement. And that's great. That's usually a function of what Tom Izzo does and how he approaches scheduling. But it's definitely the case this year. Look, it's going to be a different team. You lose 6 guys who were in your rotation to one degree or another. By the end of the season, let's say 5, because again, Book had kind of fallen out. But at the same time, I mentioned this at the outset, even with that, they've still got much more continuity and experience playing together than most of the competition. And I do think that matters. And I do think that gives them a bit of an advantage heading into the season. But that's not the totality of it. Other things have got to fall into place for this team to remain a title contender. I think it's hard to expect the defense to be top 5 again. I'd love to be wrong about that. And I'll admit there's a world where that could happen, but I'm not expecting it. I still think they should be pretty good, because when you look at Cooper and Fears for sure at the 2 most important positions defensively, and then you factor in what I think Coen Carr can be, that's a
Yeah.
pretty good trio to start. And then we know Jaxon Kohler is at least functional. You've got Jesse McCulloch. Everybody expects to be a factor off the bench inside. Same for Cam Ward. So encouraging stuff there. It really and Ugochukwu behind Fears. So we
Right.
feel
Maybe
good.
playing off the years. Yeah.
We feel good about all of that. The question really as to what their ceiling is defensively, I think, is that 2 spot with Tang and Fort and maybe Jordan Scott too. That's where it turns because that is, even though I don't think that position is as important as the 1 or the 5, it does tend to be the position where frequently other teams' best offensive player is, right?
Right. Sure. The
So
shooter or whatever. Yeah.
you've got to at least be competent there. And we just don't know enough yet. So that's why I can't get to they can be as good as they were defensively last year. That perimeter defense MSU had was something else. You might not see that again from that many guys for a long time. I don't know that Izzo's ever had collectively a better the one group that I would put in the same category would be if you were talking about Mateen Cleaves, Charlie Bell, and Morris Peterson, okay. I'm going to give it to that group. And Jase Richardson coming off the bench, I'll give it to that group. Other than that, I don't know that we've seen a better foursome than Fears and the 3 guys that have left. You know? So that's a tough thing to replace and think you're going to get to the same level. But I do think they can still be pretty good defensively. So then you look at the other end. Can they remain as aggressive in the half court? Meaning, can they draw fouls the way they did? And do they shoot free throws as well as they did? If that's happening, and I think there's a chance that can happen, that's going to help a lot. Are they able to get some semblance of a low post game, which really has been largely absent the last couple of years? I think there's a chance. I'm not saying it's, Zach Randolph time, but with the improvements we've heard Carson Cooper's made, with Jaxon Kohler hopefully continuing to finish a little better, yeah, I think there's a chance that they could have a little more horsepower on the blocks than we've seen lately, which frankly is not a high bar to clear. We know what they're going to be in transition, and I think it's going to be the same kind of emphasis as it was last year. There's no good reason this team should fall off at all in terms of its rebounding. Not that I could see. I mean,
Yeah.
we know
I
what
agree.
Kohler is, and he could even get a little better. Carson Cooper, Coen Carr's got a lot of room for improvement. We talked about Kur Teng being a guy, Cam Ward, Jesse McCulloch. I think there's no reason to expect the rebounding is going to slip. So all those things should be there. We got to see about turnover mitigation because it's a different team, and frankly, there could be a downtick there because last year you had 4 guys playing in the backcourt, all of whom had point guard skills.
Right.
This year you don't have that. So it wouldn't surprise me to see the turnovers tick up a bit, but as long as it's not disastrous, I don't think it'll be a big negative. The big and obvious area, and I say this having spent a lot of time talking about how there's too much emphasis on it, but it is true. One area where you could see an offensive uptick would be 3-point efficiency. And again, clearing 31%, that's not a high bar to get over. So
320th. Yeah. It's not hard to be better.
I'm not saying I expect this to be a dynamite shooting team, but do I expect it to be improved on last year? Yes, I do, because they almost can't be worse. And I'm knocking on wood as I'm saying that. But it's true. So, yeah, and that's kind of what a long-winded way of saying what you said, that, well, maybe the defense won't be as good, but there's reason to think maybe the offense will be a little better and maybe it all nets out. Maybe. I'm saying a little more reserved than that. I need to see it. But I am with you insofar as obviously I picked them second. So I am optimistic about this team. I think this can be a good team. And I think it could be as is often the case, I think it can be a better team in March than it is in November. As some of these pieces, is the Tre Fort in March better than the Tre Fort in November? Probably.
Right.
Is the
Right.
Cam Ward and
Yeah.
Jordan Scott, the Ugochukwu, McCulloch, the Tang, all those guys. who haven't played much at Michigan State. Are they better 5 months from now? Yeah, you'd figure they probably are. And that doesn't even factor what development's going to happen with the guys that we feel we sort of know something about. So, yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic. I think it's going to be a good season. Whether it's enough to do, to accomplish the things that, frankly, are yearly standards at Michigan State, I don't know. I don't think you can be this definitely is not a team in my mind that you can look at the way we did, say, with the 2019-2020 team. Saying, well, they're coming off a Final Four and a Big Ten title and a Big Ten tournament title, and they got most of the key pieces back. Yes, they could be the number one team in the country. I'm not there. I think that would be crazy. But am I optimistic they're going to do a lot of good things this year? Yes, I am.
Yeah, I feel like the Big Ten media consensus was Michigan State like 7th to 9th, somewhere in the
No, a
sort of
little
middle of
better,
the pack.
little better
Like,
than that. And I'm actually, I think they were 5th in the coaches
okay.
poll, I think. Or the media poll, I
I
mean.
feel like the media had them in like 500 in the league or something like that, which would surprise me. But I mean, I guess it's possible.
Yeah,
But
I think that
because you don't, again,
I
don't
do
necessarily
think
know the
this.
teams.
We're a little more bullish on them than most. I mean, I'm even with the
Yeah,
more optimistic. I was watching CBS, Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander the other day, and one of them had Michigan State 5th and the other had them 4th. Well, that's not disrespect.
no,
That equates
well,
to a good team
BTT.
and a team that's probably good enough to go to the second weekend at least and all that. But
Yeah,
it's also a reflection of, as I said at the outset, there's a lot of unknowns because there are a lot of teams in this league that look good to me. There's only one team I think looks great, but there are a lot of
yeah,
teams that you could easily see being good to very good. And Michigan State's one of those, but there are a bunch of others. To me, the tiebreaker here, when you're in that situation where it's tough to parse between so many closely bunched teams, it's continuity and Tom Izzo. It's those two things that have me putting them second instead of 5th or 6th.
right. Yeah, well, and it's going to be a compelling year. This is why we enjoy sports, because you don't know what's going to happen, and you don't really. There's no way to predict the twists and turns and what's going to happen on the floor. And so, look, again, I think this is good. There's every reason to be optimistic for Michigan State fans. This should be a very fun season. I think these are a lot of fun players. I mean, things can happen, obviously, but I really, really anticipate that this is going to be a good year, just like last year. I feel more confident about this year than last year. And last year I thought it was going to be pretty good, and it turned out exceeded my expectations. And so for the Michigan fans, we've been having a little, we've things have not gone so great in the football field. Hopefully, this will be a nice little reprieve, and we'll get back to sort of it's maintain the Tom Izzo basketball that we've been seeing over the years. Just a quick reminder: if you're not on subscribe to the show, obviously do that. Thanks for hanging through. This is really deep dive into the preview for Michigan State. Check out our sponsors: Nudge Printing, Brothers Adjust Your Gutters, and the Swedish Squad of Grand Rapids. You can find all that at our support page at thefinalfoursoontheschedule.com/support. We also have the Beat Rod contest, which I'll be mentioning throughout the season until it's too late to enter. Send emails to me, Eric, at tffinots.com. You certainly can send just regular general emails as well, ideas for shows, those sorts of things. But send her your prediction for the Big Ten final standings 1 through 18. It costs nothing. Nudge Printing prizes for those winners. As a tiebreaker, make sure you put down how many points you think Michigan State will score against Michigan this season. And they play twice, so 140 points, etc. So put that in there. Get that to me before the first Big Ten game, which is now, I think it'd be sometime 1st of November, like the very first day of December or something like that. I can't remember exactly, maybe November or something. So you got a month, you got a couple months to get that in. You got Rod's predictions here to use as your sort of your template, and so pick whatever you want. And then I guess then that's pretty much it. Again, make sure you check us out on YouTube, especially post games. I have to get back from Lansing, but then once we get back, we will go live with our analysis of the show or of the game. And we'll have, of course, a pregame for every game as well this season. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.